My name is Chloe Bennett, and at 34 years old, I was the punchline of every family joke. At my mother's birthday dinner, my sister leaned over her champagne glass and whispered that I could not even afford to breathe the air in this restaurant. I stayed silent. Then the executive chef himself walked out of the kitchen, bypassed our entire table, and bowed slightly to me. He asked if the tasting menu was to my liking tonight. My entire family froze. My sister scoffed and demanded to know why he was addressing me. I just smiled because they had no idea that the empire they were desperately trying to impress actually belonged to me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who severely underestimated your worth. The private VIP room of L'Etoile, the city's most exclusive Michelin-starred restaurant, was silent for a long, uncomfortable moment after the executive chef retreated to the kitchen. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the remains of our extravagant meal, but the atmosphere at our table had suddenly turned freezing cold. Victoria, my older sister, and the undisputed golden child of the Bennett family, aggressively set her champagne flute down. She adjusted her designer silk blouse and let out a harsh, dismissive laugh. "Do not look so smug, Chloe," Victoria sneered, her voice dripping with the usual condescension she had directed at me since we were children. "He probably recognized you from the service entrance. What do you do, deliver their wholesale vegetables, or maybe you clean their kitchens on the weekends? I hear freelance work is tough these days." I did not take the bait. I picked up my sparkling water and took a slow, measured sip, watching her scramble to rationalize what had just happened. For my entire life, Victoria had to be the successful one, the beautiful one, the one who married into elite circles. The idea that a renowned chef would bypass her to address me, the sister she deemed an absolute failure, was causing a visible short circuit in her brain. All evening I had sat quietly while they gorged themselves on imported caviar and Wagyu beef. My mother had explicitly told me to only order a side salad. I complied, letting them construct their own trap. Before Victoria could continue her tired tirade, the heavy mahogany doors of the VIP room opened. A waiter in a crisp black suit glided silently toward our table. He carried a sleek black leather folder resting on a silver tray. With practiced elegance, he placed the folder directly in the center of the table, right next to the empty bottles of vintage wine. My mother Beatrice stopped swirling her martini. She reached out with a manicured hand, flashing the massive diamond ring she constantly paraded around her country club friends. She pulled the leather folder toward her, flipped it open, and let her dark eyes scan the bottom line. A tight, self-satisfied smile spread across her heavily powdered face. She picked up her silver dessert fork and tapped it deliberately against her crystal water glass. The sharp, ringing sound commanded absolute attention in the quiet room. $15,000, Beatrice announced, her voice projecting the kind of quiet authority she used to dictate our entire lives. We certainly enjoyed ourselves tonight, did we not? She closed the folder and slid it directly across the smooth white tablecloth. It came to a stop right in front of my plate. I stared at the black leather, then looked up at my mother. "You are paying for this tonight?" "Chloe," Beatrice commanded, her tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "I am paying for your birthday dinner. The dinner you insisted on hosting here." Beatrice let out a dramatic sigh, pinching the bridge of her nose as if my very existence was a burden she was graciously bearing. "Do not play dumb with me, Chloe. You are 34 years old. You live in a rented apartment. You have no husband, no children, and you spend your days working some dead-end job. You bring absolutely no value to the Bennett family name." Victoria chimed in, nodding vigorously. "Exactly. Marcus and I are building a legacy. We have a reputation to uphold in this city. The least you can do is contribute something practical to this family, since you refuse to settle down and find a respectable man to take care of you. Pay the bill to prove you are not completely useless." Beatrice finished, her eyes locking onto mine with a cold, hard stare. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "Consider it rent for all the years we put up with your embarrassing lack of ambition." I looked at the bill again. $15,000. It was a staggering amount for a single meal, but they had intentionally ordered the most expensive items on the menu. They wanted to financially ruin me, just to put me back in my place, just to ensure I stayed firmly beneath their expensive shoes. "I am not paying a single cent of this," I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady. "I did not order those 3 bottles of champagne, and I am certainly not going to fund your attempt to impress your country club friends with money you clearly do not want to spend yourselves." The room erupted. Victoria gasped loudly, clutching her chest, as if I had physically struck her. Beatrice slammed her hands on the table, rattling the silverware. "You ungrateful little brat!" Beatrice hissed, her carefully constructed high society mask slipping completely to reveal the venom underneath. "You will do exactly as I say, or I will make sure you are cut off from this family forever." Before my mother could escalate her threats further, a deep, booming laugh echoed from the other side of the table. Marcus, my 38-year-old African-American brother-in-law, leaned back in his chair with an arrogant smirk. Marcus was a highly successful hedge fund manager at Apex Capital, and he never let anyone forget it. He prided himself on being a self-made titan of Wall Street. He reached into the breast pocket of his tailored Italian suit and pulled out a heavy metal black card. He tossed it onto the silver tray with a loud, confident clatter that echoed through the private room. "Take the bill to the waiter," Marcus barked, not even bothering to look at the man. "Let me show you how real money works, little girl. This is why you will always be at the bottom of the food chain, Chloe. You do not understand power." The waiter picked up the tray with a polite nod and disappeared through the mahogany doors. Marcus spent the next 2 minutes lecturing me about wealth management and how his firm was about to go public, ensuring his status as a billionaire. Victoria beamed at him, rubbing his arm affectionately, while sending smug glances my way. Beatrice finally relaxed, taking a long sip of her martini, looking incredibly pleased that I had been put firmly in my place by her wealthy son-in-law. Then the heavy doors swung open again. The waiter returned, his expression completely neutral. He walked straight past my mother and Victoria, stopping directly next to Marcus. He placed the silver tray back down on the table. The heavy metal black card sat right next to the original receipt. "I deeply apologize, sir," the waiter said, his voice polite, but carrying across the dead silent room. "But your card has been declined for insufficient funds." The silence in the room stretched so tight it threatened to snap. Marcus blinked rapidly, his arrogant smirk melting into a mask of pure panic. He snatched the heavy metal card off the silver tray as if it physically burned his fingers. "There has to be a mistake," Marcus stammered, his voice pitching an octave higher than its usual booming register. "Run it again. Or wait, it is probably a bank fraud alert. Yes, that is exactly what this is. I made a massive offshore transfer this morning, and it triggered a security freeze. You know how these high-security elite accounts operate." The waiter maintained his perfectly neutral expression, refusing to buy into the desperate performance. "I assure you, sir, the terminal indicated insufficient funds, not a security freeze. We can try another payment method if you prefer." Sweat began to bead on his forehead, soaking into the stiff collar of his expensive Italian suit. He patted his pockets frantically, muttering curses under his breath, while deliberately avoiding eye contact with everyone at the table. Victoria sat completely frozen, her mouth slightly open, staring at her husband as if he had just turned into a stranger. The grand illusion of their limitless wealth was cracking right in front of her eyes, and she simply lacked the mental capacity to process the humiliation. Beatrice slammed her hand against the table, causing the heavy silver flatware to rattle dangerously against the fine bone china. The sudden noise made Victoria jump, but Beatrice kept her furious, dark gaze locked entirely on me. "This is absolutely ridiculous," my mother hissed, her face flushing an ugly, angry crimson. "We are not going to sit here and be humiliated by some pathetic glitch in a banking system. Chloe, pull out your debit card and take care of this mess right now." I looked at her, keeping my posture relaxed and completely unbothered. "I already told you I'm not paying for a dinner I did not order. You will do exactly what I say, Beatrice commanded, leaning across the table until I could smell the bitter gin on her breath. Marcus and Victoria have done so much to elevate our family reputation. The very least you can do is drain whatever measly savings you have sitting in your pathetic checking account to cover the birthday dinner for your mother. You owe us that much respect. I owe you, I repeated, letting the words hang heavily in the air for a moment. I picked up my linen napkin and dabbed the corners of my mouth, buying a precious second of time to let my anger sharpen into something cold and precise. You want me to use my savings? That is an incredibly interesting request coming from you, Mom. Do not use that disrespectful tone with me, Beatrice snapped, adjusting her diamond necklace. Just pay the damn bill so we can leave this awful place. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table. Use my savings, I said again, keeping my voice perfectly level, but loud enough for the waiter who was still standing nearby to hear every single syllable. Like how you used my savings 10 years ago. Like how you forged my signature to drain my $50,000 college fund just so Victoria could put a down payment on her sprawling starter home. Victoria gasped loudly, her hand flying to her throat, while the face of Beatrice drained of all color, turning an ashen white. The brutal truth hit the room like a physical blow. For years, they had maintained the convenient fiction that I simply dropped out of university because I lacked the drive to finish my degree. They told all their country club friends that I was lazy and unmotivated. They conveniently left out the part where I went to the financial aid office to pay my tuition for junior year, only to discover my trust account had been completely zeroed out by my own mother. "Keep your voice down, my father," William growled, stepping into the conversation for the first time all evening. He adjusted his silk tie, his face darkening into a scowl of pure rage. "We are in public. You will not air private family business in front of the help. The help is waiting to be paid, Dad," I pointed out, gesturing to the waiter who remained completely unfazed by the unfolding drama. "And I am not airing business. I am stating a factual event. A fact that ruined my credit and forced me to work 3 terrible jobs just to keep a roof over my head, while Victoria hosted lavish dinner parties in a house my stolen money paid for. It was a family loan." Victoria interjected, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "Mom said you agreed to it. She said you wanted to help Marcus and me get established in a proper neighborhood. She forged my signature on a bank withdrawal slip," Victoria, I stated, flatly, refusing to let her play the victim. "That is not a loan. That is felony fraud." William slammed his heavy fist down on the table with such immense force that a crystal wine glass tipped over, spilling dark red liquid across the pristine white linen like blood. "That is enough," William roared, his booming voice silencing the entire room. He pointed a thick, calloused finger directly at my face. "You listen to me, you ungrateful little wretch. We kept a roof over your head for 18 years. We fed you. We clothed you. If your mother needed to reallocate some family funds to ensure the successful future of your sister, then that was her absolute right as a parent." He pointed at me. "You will pay this bill right now, or tomorrow I am evicting you from the rotting cabin. You will be homeless." I took a sip of my water. "You cannot kick me out, Dad. I sold the cabin this morning for $2.5 million. The silence that followed my declaration was absolute. I watched the blood drain from my father's face before rushing back with violent intensity, turning his skin a mottled, angry purple. The thick vein in his forehead, the one that always bulged right before he lost his temper, throbbed visibly against his skin. He gripped the edge of the heavy mahogany table so hard his knuckles turned stark white. "You are lying," William roared, spit flying from his lips. "You did not sell anything. You cannot sell anything. That property belongs to the Bennett Family Trust. I control the trust. I am the sole executor, and you are just a foolish little girl speaking out of turn." He stood up, towering over the table, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me the way he had done my entire childhood. His chest heaved as he pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "I have the power of attorney, Chloe. I have the legally binding documents filed in the state of New York. Do you have any idea what you have just done? I needed that property today. I was leveraging that land tomorrow morning to secure a massive commercial bridge loan. Without that collateral, my manufacturing firm will default on its creditors by Friday. You have just destroyed my company. He confessed his financial ruin in a moment of blind, desperate rage, completely forgetting that he was screaming this in a Michelin-starred restaurant. Beatrice gasped loudly, clutching her expensive diamond necklace and looking at her husband in sheer horror. She had absolutely no idea they were facing bankruptcy. The flawless facade of their perfect wealthy life was cracking wide open right before her eyes. I did not flinch. I did not shrink back into my chair. I simply reached into my designer clutch and pulled out a single folded piece of heavy stock paper. I placed it on the table right next to the declined black card. "You do not have power of attorney, Dad," I said, keeping my voice perfectly modulated and painfully clear. "You have not had it for 5 years." William froze, his arms suspended mid-air, his mouth half open. "What are you talking about?" Grandpa was old, but he was not stupid, I explained, watching the arrogant certainty completely evaporate from my father's eyes. He saw the company ledgers. He saw you siphoning corporate funds to pay for Mom's country club galas and Victoria's lavish lifestyle. He knew you were driving the family legacy straight into a brick wall just to keep up appearances. So before his mind started to fade, he called his personal lawyers. Not the family firm that you control, his own private attorneys. I tapped the folded paper on the table with my manicured fingernail. He legally revoked your power of attorney. He dissolved the original trust structure that gave you absolute control, and he deeded the cabin entirely to me. My name is the only name on that deed. It has been mine since I turned 28. You are legally powerless to use it to save your failing business. William stared at the document on the table as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The great patriarch of the Bennett family, the man who had controlled every single aspect of my life with constant threats of financial ruin, had just been completely neutered by a piece of paper. He sank back into his chair, his broad shoulders slumping heavily under the crushing weight of his impending bankruptcy. Beatrice began to hyperventilate, fanning herself frantically with a linen napkin. "William, tell me she is lying." Beatrice pleaded, her voice shrill and dripping with panic. "Tell me we are not losing the company. We have the charity gala next month. How will we pay the caterers? What will the board members think?" He did not answer her. He just stared blankly at the tablecloth, a thoroughly broken man. I felt a sudden surge of cold, satisfying victory. For years they had held that cabin over my head, using it as a weapon to keep me compliant and afraid. They thought they could banish me to the woods, to live in squalor whenever I failed to meet their impossible shallow standards. Instead, those woods had just made me a multimillionaire and left them with absolutely nothing. But a narcissist never accepts defeat without a vicious fight. Victoria, who had been sitting in stunned silence, suddenly slammed her hands on the table. She thrust her chin out, her eyes flashing with renewed venom. She was desperate to reclaim the upper hand, desperate to prove that she was still the superior, successful sister. "Who cares about an old, rotting cabin?" Victoria sneered, her voice loud and gratingly arrogant. "Keep your pathetic $2 million, Chloe. It is pocket change compared to what we are about to have." She grabbed Marcus by the arm, pulling him closer to her, to present a united front of extreme elite wealth. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face still shining with cold, nervous sweat from his declined credit card, but Victoria did not notice his panic. She was too focused on tearing me down to secure her own fragile ego. "Marcus's hedge fund Apex Capital is going public next week," Victoria announced, a triumphant, wide smile stretching across her face. "The initial public offering is already oversubscribed by foreign investors. We are going to be worth hundreds of millions of dollars by next Friday morning. We will buy 10 cabins and burn them to the ground just for fun. You are still just a nobody, Chloe, a lonely nobody with a tiny bit of luck. You will never, ever be on our level." She crossed her arms, looking incredibly pleased with herself. She truly thought she had won. She thought the promise of future Wall Street millions could instantly erase the humiliation of the present moment. She fully expected me to shrink back to apologize, to feel small and insignificant, exactly as I always had done in the past. Instead, I let out a soft, genuine laugh. I picked up my crystal water glass and looked at her right over the sparkling rim. "Are you absolutely sure about that, IPO, Victoria?" Victoria scoffed, her perfect posture stiffening with defensive pride. "Of course I am sure. We have been preparing for this public offering for over a year. The paperwork is filed. The underwriters are secured. You are just jealous because your little real estate transaction is absolute pennies compared to true generational wealth. You sell one dusty cabin in the woods, and suddenly you think you understand global finance. It is actually pathetic." I reached into my designer clutch and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen once to wake it up and slid it smoothly across the white tablecloth directly into the center of our ruined dinner. It came to a rest right beside Marcus and his useless piece of black metal. "Take a look at the breaking news feed," I suggested, keeping my voice light and conversational. "It seems the global finance market is having a rather turbulent evening." Victoria rolled her eyes, but her gaze flicked downward. Marcus leaned in closer, his brow furrowing in confusion. The screen displayed a live alert from the Financial Times. The headline was printed in bold, glaring red letters. "Apex Capital, raided by SEC. Founder, Marcus Sterling, investigated for multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. Federal agents freeze all associated corporate and personal accounts." For a moment, the only sound in the private VIP room was the soft humming of the air conditioning. Then Victoria let out a strangled, gasping noise. She snatched the phone off the table, her perfectly manicured fingernails clicking frantically against the glass screen as she scrolled through the article. "This is a joke," Victoria said, her voice shaking violently. "This is a fake website. You paid someone to make this fake article just to embarrass us because you are jealous. You have always been a jealous, spiteful little bitch, Chloe." "It is not a fake website, Victoria," I said calmly. "Refresh the page. Check Bloomberg. Check the Wall Street Journal. Your husband is the lead story on every major financial network in the world right now." Marcus was completely frozen. His mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land. The arrogant titan of Wall Street had vanished entirely. In his place sat a terrified, sweating fraud who suddenly realized the music had stopped and there were no chairs left. "Marcus, tell her this is a lie," Victoria pleaded, turning to her husband and grabbing his lapels. "Tell her the IPO is happening. Tell her our money is safe. The down payment on the Hamptons estate. The yacht club membership. Tell me our accounts are not frozen. A minor compliance audit?" Marcus stammered, a thick bead of sweat rolling down his nose and dropping onto his silk tie. "It is just a routine regulatory check. The SEC does this to all high-performing hedge funds before an IPO. They are just verifying our asset allocation. A routine compliance audit does not involve federal agents carrying boxes of hard drives and shredded documents out of your penthouse office, Marcus," I pointed out, observing his rapid descent into total panic. "They raided your headquarters at 4 o'clock this afternoon. That is exactly why your heavy metal black card just bounced like a bad check at a cheap dive bar. The feds froze every single cent you have access to." William let out a sound that was half roar and half sob. He lunged forward, grabbing Marcus by the front of his expensive suit. "My operating capital," William bellowed, spraying spit across the table. "I gave you the factory operating capital. You promised me a guaranteed 30% return to cover my quarterly losses. Where is my money, you lying piece of trash?" "It is tied up," Marcus choked out, trying vainly to pry my father's massive hands off his suit. "It is illiquid right now, William. Just give me a few days to sort out the regulatory red tape. The assets are perfectly safe." "There are no assets, Marcus," I interjected, cutting through his pathetic lies. "You are running a textbook Ponzi scheme. You used my father's desperate manufacturing capital to pay out your early investors just to keep the illusion alive. You are completely broke, worse than broke. You are going to federal prison." Beatrice let out a high-pitched wail and collapsed back into her chair, clutching her chest. She looked between her bankrupt husband and her soon-to-be incarcerated son-in-law. The entire foundation of her high society life was turning to ash. The country club memberships, the designer clothes, the bragging rights she used to torment her friends, all of it was gone. "We are ruined," Beatrice sobbed, rocking back and forth. "The Bennett family is completely ruined. We will be the laughingstock of the city." Victoria was frantically jabbing at her own phone, trying to log into her banking apps. Error message after error message flashed across her screen. "Access denied. Account suspended. Please contact your financial institution." She dropped the phone on the table and let out a guttural scream of pure despair. "You did this," Victoria shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You somehow set this up. You tipped them off. You always wanted to ruin my life because you knew Mom and Dad loved me more." "I had absolutely nothing to do with Marcus running a fraudulent financial syndicate," I replied, maintaining my unbothered posture. "I just happened to read the news. You should try it sometime. It is much more educational than comparing diamond sizes at your country club luncheons." The sheer embarrassment and the crushing weight of his exposed reality finally broke Marcus. The smooth, sophisticated facade completely shattered, revealing a violently desperate man backed into a corner. He ground his teeth together, his eyes going wild and bloodshot. "You arrogant little bitch!" Marcus snarled, his voice dropping into a dangerous, guttural register. Before anyone could react, Marcus lunged directly across the wide dining table. He knocked over crystal water glasses and smashed through the silver dessert trays, sending expensive china crashing to the floor. He was reaching frantically for my phone, desperate to smash the device that was broadcasting his utter destruction. Or perhaps he was aiming directly for my throat. I did not even flinch. I did not move a single inch backward. Before Marcus could lay a single finger on me, a massive figure stepped out from the deep shadows near the service doors. He moved with terrifying speed for a man wearing a perfectly tailored dark suit. He intercepted Marcus mid-lunge, grabbing the hedge fund manager by the back of his expensive collar and his extended arm. With one swift, brutal motion, the man slammed Marcus downward, pinning his arm forcefully against the heavy mahogany table. Marcus let out a sharp cry of pain, his face mashed against the spilled wine and broken china. The massive man in the tailored suit did not even look at the struggling, sweating fraud pinned beneath his grip. Instead, he turned his calm, disciplined gaze directly to me. "Do you want him removed, boss?" The word hung in the air, suspended over the ruined dining table like a physical weight. "Boss." Victoria stopped breathing, her eyes darting frantically between me and the giant of a man easily holding her husband down against the spilled wine and shattered crystal. William slumped further into his chair, completely paralyzed by the rapid succession of absolutely disastrous events. His manufacturing business was dead, his golden son-in-law was a criminal, and now his disappointment of a daughter was being addressed with absolute reverence by a man who looked capable of snapping Marcus in half. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, savoring the crisp coldness against my throat. "Let him up, David," I said, my voice perfectly steady and quiet. "But if he twitches in my direction again, you have my full permission to throw him directly through the front plate glass window." David released his iron grip instantly, stepping back and crossing his massive arms over his broad chest. Marcus scrambled backward, gasping for air and clutching his bruised shoulder. He stumbled against the mahogany wainscoting, sliding down to the floor, and looking exactly like a beaten dog. The elite Wall Street predator was gone, leaving nothing but a terrified con artist waiting for the federal agents to arrive. Beatrice, however, was not broken. She was a cornered animal, and cornered animals always lash out with their sharpest teeth. She stood up abruptly, her heavy diamond necklace sparkling under the chandeliers. Her face twisted into a mask of pure aristocratic disgust, a look I had seen directed at me 1,000 times before. "Do not play these ridiculous games with us, Chloe!" Beatrice spat, her voice echoing harshly off the walls of the private room. "Boss, you think we are stupid enough to believe you are in charge of anything? You live in a rented apartment. You drive a 5-year-old sedan. You probably met the real owner of this restaurant and decided to spread your legs for him." "Mom," Victoria gasped, though a malicious glimmer of hope sparked in her tear-filled eyes. She desperately needed me to be a fraud so her own fraudulent life would not feel so utterly pathetic. It is the only logical explanation, Beatrice continued pacing behind her chair, like a prosecutor closing a slam dunk case. You have always been lazy and desperate. You could not hack it in college, so you found some ancient billionaire with a soft spot for pathetic girls. You are nothing but a cheap sugar baby playing dress-up in a Michelin-starred restaurant. I bet he let you hire this goon just to impress us. How utterly humiliating for the Bennett family name. To think my own daughter is selling herself to pay for a fancy dinner just to spite her highly successful sister. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or defend my honor against her disgusting accusations. Arguing with Beatrice was exactly what she wanted. It fed her toxic narcissism and validated her desperate need for control. Instead, I turned my attention to the heavy double doors of the VIP room. "David," I said softly, "tell Henri to bring it in." David tapped the discreet earpiece coiled behind his ear. Less than 10 seconds later, the mahogany doors swung open for the fourth time that evening. Henri, the impeccably dressed maitre d', walked into the room carrying a large, heavy frame made of brushed silver. He bypassed my parents completely. He did not even glance at the weeping Victoria or the trembling Marcus. He stood directly at my right hand, bowing slightly and presenting the frame as if it were a priceless historical artifact. Beatrice crossed her arms, her manicured fingers tapping impatiently against her elbows. "What is this nonsense now? Another fake prop for your pathetic little stage play." "Read it," I commanded, gesturing casually toward the silver frame. "Read it out loud, Mom. Read every single word." Beatrice rolled her eyes dramatically, but leaned forward, squinting at the document trapped beneath the protective glass. It was not a prop. It was the official state-issued business registration and master liquor license required to be publicly displayed in the main lobby by law. I had asked Henri to take it off the wall the moment Marcus threw his black card on the table. Her dark eyes scanned the top line, and I watched the blood completely drain from her face for the second time that night. Her jaw went slack, her carefully painted lips parting in silent, absolute shock. Her hands began to tremble so violently, she had to grip the back of her chair to keep from falling over. "Read it," Victoria demanded, stepping out from behind her ruined husband to peer over our mother's shoulder. She snatched the heavy frame from Henri, holding it up to the chandelier light. Victoria read the bold black ink printed across the official state seal. "Primary license holder and sole proprietor, Chloe Bennett, Chief Executive Officer of the Bennett Hospitality Group." The heavy silver frame slipped from Victoria's hands, crashing onto the thick Persian rug with a dull thud. "That is impossible," Victoria whispered, shaking her head frantically. "You cannot afford this place. This restaurant alone is worth millions of dollars. You do not have that kind of money. You are Chloe. You are just Chloe." "Oh, l'Etoile is just the crown jewel, Victoria," I said, leaning back in my chair and studying their devastated faces. The Bennett Hospitality Group owns 12 other high-end luxury properties across the country. We have boutique hotels in Aspen, Michelin-rated fusion restaurants in Chicago, a private golf resort in Palm Springs. I built the entire portfolio from the ground up, utilizing the capital from the hunting cabin I sold 5 years ago. I invested smart. I worked quietly. And I built an empire. William choked on his breath, his large hands gripping his chest. "You turned a rotting piece of woodland property into a national hospitality empire." "Yes, Dad," I replied, a cold smile playing on my lips. "It turns out that when you are not constantly being emotionally abused and financially drained by your own toxic parents, you can actually achieve remarkable things. You told everyone I was a failure because I refused to work at your dyeing manufacturing plant. You told everyone I was a loser because I did not marry a fraudulent Wall Street criminal like Marcus. But while you were busy keeping up appearances and living beyond your means, I was busy buying up the very establishments you used to flaunt your fake wealth." Marcus let out a low, pathetic groan, sliding further down the mahogany wall until he was curled in a fetal position on the floor. Victoria stared at me as if I had suddenly grown a second head. She could not comprehend a reality where she was not the most successful person in the room. The hierarchy of her entire life had just been violently, permanently inverted. But it was Beatrice who reacted in the most terrifying way of all. I watched her dark eyes dart back and forth, performing rapid, furious calculations. She looked at her totally bankrupt husband. She looked at her soon-to-be federally indicted son-in-law. She looked at the ruined, weeping Victoria, who would soon be stripped of her mansions and cars. Then she looked at the silver frame lying on the floor, confirming my status as a multimillionaire hospitality mogul. The transformation was instantaneous and deeply, deeply chilling. The harsh mask of aristocratic disgust vanished completely. In its place bloomed a smile so wide and brightly artificial it made my skin crawl. Her eyes filled with enormous glistening tears of manufactured joy. She clasped her hands together in front of her chest, taking a slow, dramatic step toward me, completely ignoring the destruction around her. "Oh, my brilliant girl," Beatrice cried out, her voice dripping with thick, terrifying maternal affection. "I always knew it. I always knew my tough love would make you a millionaire." Beatrice took another step forward, her arms outstretched, as if she were going to pull me into a warm maternal embrace. She completely ignored the fact that David was standing right there, his massive frame blocking her path. I simply raised my hand, and David stepped aside, allowing my mother to approach the edge of the table. I wanted to see exactly how far she was willing to take this absurd performance. "Oh, my sweet, successful girl," Beatrice cooed, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "You kept this a secret because you wanted to surprise us. You wanted to prove that you were worthy of the Bennett name. Well, you have done it, darling. You have absolutely proven yourself. We are so incredibly proud of you." She reached out and tried to grasp my hand, but I smoothly pulled my arm back and picked up my water glass instead. Beatrice's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but her desperate greed quickly smoothed over the crack in her facade. "And your timing could not be more perfect," Beatrice continued, rushing into her pitch with breathless, frantic energy. "You see, your sister and Marcus are in a tiny bit of a bind right now. It is nothing serious, just a silly misunderstanding with some overzealous government regulators. But the media will blow it completely out of proportion. You know how jealous people are of our family. They will use this to try and ruin our reputation. We simply cannot allow that to happen." I set my glass down. "And what exactly are you proposing, Mother?" Beatrice clasped her hands together, leaning across the table with wide, pleading eyes. "You are a hospitality mogul now, Chloe. You have millions in liquid capital. Marcus just needs a temporary bridge loan to satisfy the investigators and unfreeze his accounts. $5 million, that is all. $5 million wired directly to his offshore holding account right this second. It will save his firm. It will save your father's manufacturing company. It will save the family honor." Victoria, who had been sobbing quietly on the floor, suddenly scrambled to her feet. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in thick black rivers, but a new wave of arrogant entitlement washed over her face. "Yes," Victoria demanded, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You owe us. You have all this money while we have been suffering. Wire the $5 million, Chloe. Do it right now, or the SEC will take everything. You cannot just sit there and let your own family go to federal prison." I looked at my sister, and then at my mother. The sheer audacity of their demand was almost breathtaking. They had spent my entire life treating me like a worthless disappointment, treating me like dirt beneath their designer shoes. And now, less than 2 minutes after discovering my wealth, they were demanding a $5 million bailout for a criminal Ponzi scheme. "Let me make sure I understand this perfectly," I said, my voice dangerously calm and precise. "You want me to wire $5 million of my hard-earned clean money into the offshore account of a man who is currently being actively raided by the Securities and Exchange Commission. You want me to commit federal wire fraud and become a legal accessory to a multi-million-dollar financial crime just to save your country club reputation." "It is not a crime," Beatrice snapped, her voice losing its sweet maternal coating and dipping back into its natural, harsh tone. "It is a family loan. We are blood, Chloe. You have a duty to protect this family. Think of the charity gala next month. Think of what the board members will say if Marcus is arrested. You have to save us. I am not giving you a single dime." I stated the words, dropping like heavy stones onto the table. "I am not bailing out a criminal. I am not saving Dad's failing company. And I am certainly not paying $5 million to protect a family honor that never actually existed. You built your lives on lies and stolen money. Now you get to live with the consequences. The air in the room vanished. The absolute finality of my refusal hung over them like a death sentence. Beatrice stared at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of pure shock and violently boiling rage. She realized in that exact moment that she had zero control over me. The invisible strings she had used to manipulate me my entire childhood had been completely severed. When a narcissist loses control, they always revert to their most reliable weapon. Beatrice let out a sudden, sharp gasp. Her hand flew up to clutch the diamond necklace at her throat. Her eyes rolled back dramatically and she began to take short, frantic, jagged breaths. "Oh," she gasped, her knees buckling slightly. "My chest, William, my chest, the pain." She stumbled backward and collapsed into her heavy dining chair. She was very careful to angle her descent, so she landed softly on the plush velvet cushions without wrinkling her silk dress. She threw her head back against the chair, gasping loudly and clutching her heart, her face twisting into a mask of pure agony. It was a classic performance. She had used this exact same fake heart attack tactic since I was 7 years old. Whenever she was losing an argument, whenever she was caught in a lie, whenever she needed to immediately turn herself into the ultimate victim, Beatrice suddenly found herself at death's door. William completely panicked. His business was gone, but his conditioning remained absolute. He rushed to his wife's side, hovering over her gasping form with wide, terrified eyes. "Look what you have done!" William roared, turning his massive red face toward me. "You are giving her a heart attack. She cannot handle this kind of stress. You ungrateful, vicious little wretch, you are murdering your own mother." Victoria began screaming hysterically, pulling at her hair and yelling for someone to call an ambulance. The room was descending into absolute chaotic madness. A normal daughter would have rushed forward. A normal daughter would have been terrified. A normal daughter would have given them anything they wanted just to make the screaming stop. I simply reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone again. I did not dial emergency services. I did not look panicked. I calmly scrolled through my contacts, tapped a number, and pressed the speakerphone button, setting the device down on the pristine white tablecloth. The phone rang twice, before a crisp, professional voice echoed through the chaotic VIP room. "Dr. Evans speaking." "Hello, Dr. Evans," I said, speaking clearly over my mother's dramatic gasping and my father's furious yelling. "This is Chloe Bennett. I am sorry to bother you at this hour, but my mother is currently attempting to fake a massive cardiac event in the middle of my restaurant. Could you please verify the results of the comprehensive stress test you performed on her yesterday afternoon?" The screaming in the room stopped instantly. William's jaw dropped open. Victoria's hysterical crying ceased, as if someone had flipped a switch. Beatrice froze in her chair, her hand still clutching her chest. Her dramatic gasping caught dead in her throat. Dr. Evans let out a tired, heavy sigh that broadcast perfectly through the speakerphone. "Chloe, we have discussed this," the doctor said, his voice echoing loudly off the mahogany walls. "Her heart is perfectly healthy. She just played 18 holes of tennis. There is absolutely nothing wrong with her cardiovascular system. Tell Beatrice to stop hyperventilating before she actually makes herself dizzy." I tapped the screen to end the call. The silence that followed was absolute and incredibly heavy. Beatrice immediately sat up. The dying, fragile woman vanished in a millisecond. She dropped her hand from her chest and glared at me, her face flushing a dark, furious shade of purple. She was completely exposed, deeply humiliated and shaking with a wrath so intense she looked ready to explode. Beatrice's mouth opened and closed, but for the first time in my 30 years of life, no sound came out. The great matriarch of the Bennett family had been completely neutralized by a single phone call. She stared at the sleek smartphone resting on the table as if it were a live grenade. I smiled sweetly at her. "Are we feeling better, Mother? Should I ask Henri to bring you some water? Or perhaps a tennis racket?" Beatrice let out a strangled hiss and sank back into her chair, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. The absolute silence in the private dining room was deafening. The balance of power had shifted so violently that the air felt thin and suffocating. The flawless illusion they had maintained for decades was lying in pieces on the floor right next to the shattered crystal and spilled red wine. And nature abhors a vacuum. With Beatrice utterly defeated and William slumped in a catatonic state of impending bankruptcy, Victoria realized she was entirely on her own. The golden child was suddenly standing on a collapsing pedestal with no one left to catch her. She looked at Marcus, who was still weeping silently on the Persian rug, completely broken by the reality of his impending federal indictment. She looked at our parents, who could no longer serve as her financial safety net. Then the stark, terrifying reality of her situation finally breached the thick walls of her delusion. Victoria let out a loud, dramatic wail. It was not a cry of genuine sorrow, but the shrill, calculated sound of a spoiled child realizing her favorite toy was permanently broken. She dropped to her knees beside Marcus, but she did not comfort him. Instead, she grabbed the lapels of his ruined designer suit and began shaking him violently. "What about the house, Marcus?" Victoria screamed, her voice echoing harshly off the mahogany wainscoting. "What about the Hamptons estate? The mortgage payment is due on Friday. If your accounts are frozen, the bank is going to take it. You promised me that house was protected from your business dealings." Marcus just squeezed his eyes shut and sobbed louder, burying his face in his hands. He could not even look at her. Victoria scrambled backward away from her husband as if his failure was a contagious disease. She crawled over to our father, grabbing his arm with desperate, clawing hands. "Dad, you have to do something," Victoria begged, pulling at his sleeve. "You have to call your private bankers. You have to float us a loan. They are going to take my $4 million house. All my friends live in that neighborhood. I cannot lose that house, Dad. I will be a laughingstock. I will be ruined." William looked at his favorite daughter with dead, hollow eyes. He slowly pulled his arm out of her frantic grasp. "I have nothing, Victoria," he said, his voice a dry, raspy whisper that sounded like sand rubbing against stone. "He took it all. Every liquid asset the company had is gone. I am filing for bankruptcy in the morning." Victoria froze. The safety net was officially gone. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale and frantic. She whipped her head around, scanning the room like a trapped animal looking for an exit. Her wild eyes finally landed on me, sitting comfortably at the head of the table. The transition was sickening to watch. The arrogant, venomous sister who had just told me to keep my pathetic pocket change suddenly transformed into the ultimate victim. She pushed herself up from the floor, smoothing down her wrinkled silk dress and adopting a look of pure, desperate pleading. "Chloe," Victoria said, her voice trembling with forced fragility. "Chloe, please, you have to help me." I raised an eyebrow, resting my chin on my hand. "Help you, Victoria? I thought L'Etoile was just a dusty little restaurant. I thought my money was absolute pennies compared to your true generational wealth." She flinched, but swallowed her pride. The desperation was too great. "I was angry, Chloe. I was just stressed about Marcus, and I lashed out. You know how I get when I am anxious. But you have to understand my situation. The bank is going to foreclose on the Hamptons property by the end of the week. They will seize everything: my clothes, my jewelry, my cars. You have all this money now. You have a massive hospitality empire. $4 million is absolutely nothing to you. You can buy the house. You can pay off the bank and let us live there until Marcus sorts out this SEC misunderstanding." I stared at her, letting her absurd entitled demand hang in the heavy silence. "You want me to buy your $4 million mansion so you can continue living a life of luxury while your husband faces federal prison for defrauding our father." "I am your sister," Victoria cried, pressing a hand dramatically over her stomach. "And I am pregnant, Chloe." The word hung in the air. Beatrice gasped, sitting forward in her chair, forgetting her humiliation for a split second. William blinked, pulling himself out of his stupor. "Yes," Victoria wailed, squeezing her eyes shut to force out a fresh stream of tears. "I am 2 months pregnant. I was going to announce it at the charity gala next week. You cannot let your own flesh and blood go homeless, Chloe. You cannot put a pregnant woman out on the street. It is your duty as an aunt. You have to buy the house. It is the only way to save the family honor and protect my innocent baby." She stood there cradling her flat stomach, looking at me with wide, expectant eyes. She truly believed this was her trump card. She believed that wielding a pregnancy would instantly erase decades of psychological abuse and force me into submission. It was the ultimate manipulation tactic designed to make me look like a monster if I refused to fund her lavish lifestyle. I let out a slow, soft sigh. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my compact, checking my lipstick in the small mirror. "I am not going to buy your house, Victoria," I said, snapping the compact shut. Victoria gasped, her face contorting with immediate rage. "You heartless bitch!" she screamed, dropping the fragile victim act instantly. "I am carrying your niece or nephew. How can you be so cruel? You have millions of dollars and you are going to let a pregnant woman lose her home. You are a monster." I did not argue with her. I simply raised my right hand and snapped my fingers once. The sharp sound echoed loudly in the quiet room. Instantly, the heavy double doors opened again. My personal assistant Sarah stepped into the VIP room. She was wearing a sharp tailored suit and held a thick manila envelope in her hands. She walked directly past my gaping parents and stopped right next to my chair. "I did not say I was going to let you lose your home. Victoria," I corrected, maintaining a perfectly level tone. "I said I am not going to buy your house. And the reason I am not going to buy your house is because I already did." Victoria froze, her mouth hanging open. "What are you talking about?" "When the SEC began investigating Apex Capital last month, the federal agents reached out to all of Marcus' major creditors," I explained, leaning back and interlacing my fingers. "The bank holding the mortgage on your precious Hamptons estate panicked. They knew the asset freeze was coming, and they wanted to offload the toxic debt immediately before the federal indictments dropped. My holding company quietly purchased the entire mortgage portfolio at a significant discount 3 weeks ago." I nodded to Sarah. She stepped forward and extended the thick manila envelope toward Victoria. Victoria stared at the envelope as if it were covered in poison. She slowly reached out her hands, trembling violently, and took it from Sarah's grasp. "I am your new landlord, Victoria," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, absolute whisper. "My company owns the deed to the Hamptons property, and because Marcus has not made a mortgage payment in 90 days due to his little Ponzi scheme collapsing, you are currently in severe breach of contract." Victoria tore open the envelope. She pulled out a stack of legally binding documents stamped with the official seal of the state of New York. Her eyes scanned the top page, and she let out a horrified, whimpering sound. "Inside that envelope is your official 3-day eviction notice," I stated, watching the absolute devastation wash over her face. "You have exactly 72 hours to pack up your designer clothes and vacate my property." Victoria stared at the eviction notice, as if the typed black letters were actively burning her eyes. Her hands shook so violently, the thick, heavy stock paper rattled in her grip. The reality of her situation was finally crashing through her impenetrable fortress of entitlement. There was no secret trust fund left to save her. There was no billionaire hedge fund husband to hide behind. She was entirely at my mercy, and she knew I had absolutely none left to give. William slammed his hands down on the table with a force that rattled the remaining crystal glasses and sent silverware clattering to the floor. His face flushed a dangerous mottled shade of crimson, and the thick vein in his forehead throbbed rhythmically against his skin. The great patriarch of the Bennett family, the man who had just admitted to absolute financial ruin, suddenly found a brand new reservoir of hypocritical rage. "Have you completely lost your mind, Chloe?" William bellowed, his voice booming through the private dining room like a crack of thunder. He pointed a thick, trembling finger directly at my face, his chest heaving with indignation. "You are evicting your own sister. You are throwing her out onto the street like common trash. She is a pregnant, vulnerable woman carrying your own niece or nephew. Have you absolutely no sense of basic human decency? Have you no soul at all?" He puffed out his broad chest, taking a step forward, trying to use his sheer physical size to intimidate me exactly as he had done my entire childhood. But his aggressive intimidation tactics no longer worked. He was just a loud, bankrupt man yelling in a luxury restaurant he could no longer afford. "You have millions of dollars," William continued, spit flying from his lips as his anger escalated. "You sit there bragging about your massive hospitality empire, and yet you deliberately purchase the debt on your sister's home just to make her homeless. You are sick, Chloe. You are a sick, vindictive monster. She is carrying a child. That baby is innocent. You are endangering the next generation of this family, all because you hold a petty, childish grudge against us." I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch or shrink back from his explosive anger. I simply watched him perform his tired routine of righteous indignation. Before I could respond, Marcus suddenly scrambled across the floor. He crawled toward my chair, his expensive Italian suit stained with spilled wine and smeared with dirt from the Persian rug. He looked completely pathetic, a broken, desperate shell of the arrogant Wall Street titan who had sneered at me less than an hour ago. "Chloe, please," Marcus begged, his voice cracking with pure desperation. He clasped his hands together, looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "I messed up. I admit it. I made some terrible bad calls with the fund. The market shifted unexpectedly and I got severely overleveraged. I was just trying to keep everything afloat until the IPO finalized. I was desperate. But please, you have to give us a break. You cannot throw Victoria out. The stress will destroy her. The SEC is already taking everything I have. Do not take our home too. Please have a little mercy." He was sweating profusely, thick drops rolling down his forehead and stinging his eyes. He reached out as if to touch the toe of my designer heel, but David took one massive, menacing step forward. Marcus instantly recoiled, shrinking back like a frightened, beaten animal. I looked down at the ruined man kneeling on the floor. I let his pathetic, desperate pleas hang in the heavy silence, allowing the utter humiliation of his position to fully sink into the minds of everyone in the room. "Mercy," I said, testing the word on my tongue as if it were a strange foreign concept. "You want mercy, Marcus. You want me to deeply consider the immense stress you are currently under. That is a truly fascinating request coming from you." I picked up my crystal water glass and took a slow, deliberate sip before returning my cold gaze to him. "Let us talk about your extreme financial desperation, Marcus. Let us talk about the specific timeline of your sudden liquidity crisis." Marcus swallowed hard, his prominent Adam's apple bobbing visibly. He opened his mouth to formulate another excuse, but I held up a single manicured finger, demanding absolute unbroken silence. "Tell them, Marcus," I commanded, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet surgical register. "Tell my parents exactly why you really needed that $2 million bridge loan from my father last month. Tell them what that enormous sum of money was actually for." Marcus froze completely. The last remaining trace of color vanished from his face, leaving him looking like a bloodless corpse. His eyes darted wildly toward William, then toward Victoria, and finally back to me in pure, unadulterated panic. He pressed his lips tightly together, refusing to speak a single word. He was absolutely terrified. "What bridge loan?" William demanded, his head whipping back and forth between Marcus and me. He frowned deeply, his bushy eyebrows pulling together in fierce confusion. "I gave Marcus that $2 million to secure the initial underwriting for the corporate IPO. He told me it was a mandatory escrow deposit required by the investment bank. He personally guaranteed it would double my return within 60 days. I shifted my gaze from the trembling fraud on the floor directly to my father. William was gripping the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles stark white, as he desperately clung to the last fragile lie holding his entire worldview together. "There was no mandatory escrow deposit." "Dad," I said, keeping my tone perfectly conversational and relaxed. "Investment banks do not require $2 million bridge loans from the fathers of hedge fund managers to secure a public offering. That is not how global finance works. You would have known that if you had consulted an actual independent attorney instead of blindly trusting the golden boy who married your favorite daughter." William stared at me, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. "Then what was the money for?" I turned my attention to Victoria, who was still clutching the eviction notice to her chest. She looked pale and sickly, but her eyes were fixed on Marcus with a growing, creeping suspicion. "Dad." Victoria is not pregnant. I announced the words echoing with razor-sharp clarity across the silent room. The reaction was instantaneous. Beatrice let out a sharp gasp, covering her mouth with both hands in shock. Victoria flinched violently, as if I had physically struck her across the face. "How dare you!" Victoria shrieked, her voice pitching upward in wild, panicked defense. "How dare you accuse me of lying about my own baby? You are just trying to deflect attention because you are a monster evicting a vulnerable pregnant woman. You are not pregnant, Victoria," I repeated, shaking my head slowly with absolute certainty. "There is no baby. There never was a baby. You faked the entire thing. You bought a fake ultrasound off the internet and orchestrated a tearful, highly emotional announcement at Sunday dinner specifically to manipulate Dad. You knew his manufacturing business was bleeding cash. You knew he was highly hesitant to give Marcus any more operating capital, so you played the ultimate trump card. You gave him the promise of his first grandchild to completely soften him up." Victoria opened her mouth to scream another vicious denial, but no sound came out. She looked at our father, whose face was slowly transitioning from aggressive rage to profound, crushing shock. "You faked the ultrasound," William whispered, his voice trembling with a terrifying quiet intensity. "You used my grandchild to get my last retirement account." "Yes, she did, Dad," I confirmed mercilessly. "But the most interesting part of this entire tragedy is what Marcus actually did with your hard-earned retirement money. He did not invest it in his failing hedge fund. He did not use it to pay off the early investors in his fraudulent Ponzi scheme. He did not even use it to pay the mortgage on the Hamptons estate." I looked down at Marcus, who was shaking so hard his teeth were visibly chattering against each other. "Marcus used your $2 million to pay off his 3 mistresses," I stated coldly and precisely. Beatrice let out a high-pitched squeak that sounded exactly like a dying bird. Victoria dropped the eviction notice, her hands falling limply to her sides. She stared at her husband, her eyes wide and blank with total consuming disbelief. "He was incredibly careless," I explained, watching the devastation ripple violently through the room. "When the Ponzi scheme started collapsing, the free-flowing money instantly dried up. He could no longer afford the luxury apartments and the expensive designer gifts he was providing for his girlfriends in Manhattan. They realized he was broke, and they threatened to go public with the affairs right before the IPO. They threatened to completely ruin his pristine public image." I tapped my manicured fingernail against the table, emphasizing every single word to ensure there was no misunderstanding. Marcus was utterly terrified that the scandal would spook the underwriters and kill the public offering entirely. So he begged Victoria to help him secure immediate hush money. Victoria, knowing her entire luxurious lifestyle depended heavily on that IPO, willingly faked a pregnancy to manipulate you into emptying your final retirement account. You handed over $2 million to secure your family legacy, Dad. But in reality, you simply funded the non-disclosure agreements for the women your son-in-law was sleeping with behind your favorite daughter's back. The absolute silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. William stared at Marcus, his massive chest heaving with slow, terrifying breaths. The revelation that his favorite daughter had conspired to steal his last dime to cover up her husband's infidelity shattered the very core of his reality. Victoria slowly turned her head, looking down at the man kneeling on the rug. Her flawless makeup was completely ruined, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She had known about the money. She had orchestrated the fake pregnancy, but she had clearly never known what the money was actually for. Marcus could not meet her eyes. He stared at the floor, his silence providing the ultimate damning confession. The silence in the VIP room shattered with the sharp crack of flesh striking flesh. Victoria swung her arm with terrifying force, slapping Marcus directly across his jaw. The blow echoed off the mahogany walls, making the remaining crystal glasses vibrate on the table. Marcus stumbled backward, his hand flying to his rapidly reddening cheek. "You disgusting, filthy pig!" Victoria shrieked, her voice tearing through the air like shredded metal. "You took my father's money to pay off your cheap little tramps. I lied to my own family for you. I faked a pregnancy for you. I went to a clinic and bought a fake ultrasound off a pregnant teenager in a waiting room to save your pathetic life. And you were sleeping with other women. Marcus dropped his pathetic, remorseful act in a heartbeat. The terrified, cornered animal suddenly bared his teeth. He scrambled to his feet, wiping a streak of blood from the corner of his mouth, where her diamond ring had caught his lip. "Do not you dare play the innocent victim with me, Victoria," Marcus roared, pointing a shaking finger an inch from her face. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You knew my fund was bleeding cash for the last 14 months, but you absolutely refused to cut back on a single luxury. You demanded the private jet trips to St. Bart's. You demanded the monthly $100,000 shopping sprees at Bergdorf Goodman. You forced me to embezzle client funds just to keep up your ridiculous facade." Victoria gasped, taking a step back as Marcus advanced on her. "I never told you to steal," she stammered, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "I just told you to provide the lifestyle I deserved as your wife." "You drained me dry," Marcus spat, moving closer until she bumped hard into the edge of the dining table. "You drained the business. You drained your father. I had to pay off those women, because if they went public, the IPO would die, and you would have left me anyway. You do not care about me. You only care about the black card in my wallet." "Well, guess what, sweetheart? The card is maxed out, and the FBI is bagging up your designer shoes right now." They tore into each other like starving wolves, completely stripped of their polished high society masks. The perfect golden couple of Boston was nothing more than two desperate parasites fighting over the last scrap of rotten meat. They screamed about hidden bank accounts, unpaid credit card bills, and secret debts. They hurled vicious insults, entirely forgetting where they were. I watched the carnage from my seat at the head of the table, sipping my water. Henri and 3 other servers were standing frozen by the double doors, openly staring at the implosion of the mighty Bennett family. The illusion was entirely eradicated in front of the restaurant's staff. The wealthy elite they had pretended to be were revealed as common, desperate frauds. William stood completely rigid, listening to his daughter and son-in-law scream about spending his life savings on designer clothes and hush money. The realization hit him with the force of a speeding freight train. He had alienated me, his only successful child, to pour his last remaining dime into a black hole of vanity and deceit. He had funded his own ruin. His knees simply gave out. William collapsed heavily into the nearest dining chair, the wooden frame groaning violently under his dead weight. He stared blankly at the stained Persian rug, his broad shoulders slumping forward. He looked utterly destroyed, a hollow shell of the terrifying patriarch who had ruled our family with an iron fist for 30 years. "My money!" William whispered, his voice barely audible over Victoria and Marcus' screaming match. "My company, the factory, it is all gone. For shoes, for mistresses." He buried his face in his large hands, his massive shoulders shaking with silent, dry sobs. He had gambled his entire legacy on the golden child, and he had lost everything. It was the first time I had ever seen my father cry. I felt absolutely nothing but cold, clinical satisfaction. Beatrice, however, absolutely refused to accept defeat. A true narcissist will cling to a burning ship until the very last plank sinks beneath the waves. She marched over to Victoria and Marcus, grabbing them both by the arms and physically shoving them apart with surprising strength. "Stop this right now," Beatrice commanded, her voice shrill and trembling with desperate authority. "Stop embarrassing yourselves in front of the help." She shot a venomous glare at Henri, who immediately lowered his eyes but did not move from the doorway. Beatrice smoothed down the front of her ruined silk dress, tilting her chin up in a pathetic attempt to reclaim her shattered dignity. She plastered a rigid, terrifying smile onto her face. "Listen to me," Beatrice said, turning to William and the fighting couple. "We are the Bennetts. We do not panic like common peasants. Yes, Marcus made a few temporary miscalculations. Yes, Victoria was perhaps a bit overzealous with her credit cards. But this is merely a minor financial setback. We simply need to activate our social network." William slowly lowered his hands, looking at his wife as if she had completely lost her mind. "Our network, Beatrice. I am filing for bankruptcy tomorrow morning. The SEC is raiding Marcus. We have no network left. And we will bounce back, Beatrice insisted, her eyes wide and manic with pure denial. We are elite members of the Sterling Country Club. We have friends who control banks, William. We have politicians in our contacts. The Carringtons, the Vanderbilts, the Rothschilds. We will simply host a private dinner at the club next week. We will explain that Marcus is the victim of a political witch hunt. Our friends will rally around us. They will float us the capital we need. They will never let a prominent family like ours fall from grace. She turned to look at me, a twisted, triumphant smirk reappearing on her face. You think you have won, Chloe. You think just because you have a few $1,000,000 you can destroy us. You are nothing but a glorified caterer. We have generational status. We have the Sterling Country Club. We will simply bypass you entirely and rebuild. I let out a soft, genuine laugh. I reached down to the floor where my leather briefcase was resting against the leg of my chair. I lifted it onto my lap and popped the gold clasps. It is truly remarkable, Mother, I said, reaching inside the dark leather interior. You have literally hit rock bottom, and yet you are still trying to dig a basement. I pulled out another crisp white envelope. This one bore the unmistakable gold foil crest of the Sterling Country Club. Beatrice stared at the heavy textured paper as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. Her manic, triumphant smile completely dissolved, leaving behind a slack-jawed expression of pure dread. She recognized that crest instantly. The Sterling Country Club was her personal temple. It was the absolute epicenter of her social universe, the place where she spent her days sipping mimosas, judging the outfits of lesser members, and basking in the intoxicating glow of generational wealth. What is that? Beatrice demanded, her voice dropping an entire octave. Where did you get official club stationery? I did not just get the stationery, Mother, I replied, resting the envelope gently on the mahogany table. I got a seat on the governing board. William let out a choked, wheezing sound from his chair. Beatrice simply shook her head in rigid, stubborn denial. That is impossible, Beatrice snapped. The board is strictly by invitation only. It is comprised of the oldest, most established families in the state. They do not invite chefs to sit on the board. They do not invite chefs, I agreed, nodding slowly. But they absolutely roll out the red carpet for the sole owner of a global hospitality empire. The club has been operating at a massive deficit for years due to their terribly mismanaged dining and event programs. They practically begged me to join the board of directors last month to oversee their restructuring. I brought their revenue out of the red in less than 3 weeks. They value my input very highly. I slid the gold-crested envelope across the smooth surface of the table. It came to a stop directly in front of my mother's perfectly manicured hands. Open it, I suggested softly. Beatrice refused to touch it. She locked her arms against her sides, her breathing growing shallow and rapid. It was William who finally reached out. His thick fingers were trembling so violently he could barely break the wax seal. He pulled out the heavy cardstock letter and began to read. As his eyes scanned the typed words, the last remaining traces of life drained from his face. He dropped the letter onto the table as if it burned his hands. What does it say? Beatrice asked, her voice thin and reedy. He did not answer her. He just stared blankly at the wall, completely broken. Since Dad is suddenly at a loss for words, I will gladly summarize it for you, I said, leaning forward slightly. The letter states that the Sterling Country Club has permanently revoked the Bennett family membership. It is a lifetime ban. You are officially barred from the premises effectively immediately. If any of you attempt to pass through the front gates, the security staff has been instructed to contact law enforcement and have you arrested for trespassing. Beatrice gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning stark white. You are lying, she gasped. You cannot do this. You do not have the authority to unilaterally expel a legacy family. I did not do it unilaterally. I explained, my tone perfectly conversational. We held an emergency board meeting this afternoon, right after the news of the SEC raid on Marcus hit the financial wires. You see, Mother High Society is incredibly predictable. When a member becomes a catastrophic liability, the elite circle closes ranks and cuts the dead weight loose to protect their own reputations. The Bennett name is now toxic waste. It was not just the federal raid. I continued, turning my gaze toward Marcus, who was still cowering on the floor. It was also the sheer financial embarrassment. Did you really think the club treasurer would not notice that your golden son-in-law has been bouncing checks for your exorbitant monthly membership dues for the past half year? Marcus has not paid a single club invoice in 6 months. The board was already drafting your suspension notice. The FBI raid was just the final nail in the coffin. Beatrice shook her head violently, refusing to absorb the reality of her social execution. Susan Carrington would never allow this. Beatrice insisted, her voice rising to a frantic, hysterical pitch. She is the board president. We summer together in Nantucket. We are co-chairs of the autumn gala. She knows we are good for the money. Susan Carrington is the one who called the emergency meeting, I corrected mercilessly. And Arthur Vanderbilt seconded the motion to expel you. The vote was entirely unanimous, Mother. Every single one of your precious elite friends raised their hands to cast you out. They do not want to be associated with a bankrupt manufacturing executive and a disgraced Ponzi scheme operator. You are officially a social pariah. The invisible structure that held Beatrice together completely shattered. Her entire identity, her arrogant sense of superiority, her belief that she was fundamentally better than everyone else, rested entirely on her social standing. Without her country club membership, without her wealthy friends to impress, she was absolutely nothing. She was just an aging woman in a ruined silk dress sitting in a restaurant with a bankrupt husband and a criminal son-in-law. Her chest began to heave. Real frantic panic finally set in. Her eyes darted around the room, wildly searching for a way out, searching for an alternate reality where she was still the queen of her social circle. She looked at William, who was useless. She looked at Victoria, who was weeping over her eviction notice. Then Beatrice looked at me. Her brain short-circuited. The delusion that had guided her entire life shifted into its most desperate gear. She reached frantically into her designer handbag, tossing expensive cosmetics and gold-plated pens onto the table until she found what she was looking for. She pulled out a sleek leather checkbook. It was a joint account checkbook tied to William's business accounts, the very accounts that were currently empty and preparing for bankruptcy proceedings. But Beatrice did not care about logic. She only cared about survival. She grabbed a pen, her hand shaking so badly she could barely uncap it. She ripped a blank check from the binding and slammed it down on the table. She furiously scribbled her signature at the bottom, tearing through the paper with the tip of the pen. She slid the blank check across the mahogany table toward me. "Name your price," Beatrice demanded, her voice a ragged, desperate snarl. "Write down whatever number you want. 5 million, 10 million. I do not care. Buy us out of this, Chloe. Use your money to pay off Marcus investors. Buy back our country club membership. Fix this disaster right now. I am your mother and you owe me your life." I looked down at the blank check resting on the polished mahogany table. The paper was crisp, the signature frantic and jagged, tearing through the bottom line. It was the ultimate symbol of Beatrice's delusion, a worthless piece of paper drawn from a bankrupt account offered as a bribe to the daughter she despised. I did not touch it. I simply let it sit there, absorbing the pathetic reality of my mother attempting to buy her way out of the consequences of her own actions. "Owe you my life," I repeated, my voice perfectly level. "You gave me life, Beatrice, but you spent the next 30 years actively trying to destroy it. You do not want a daughter. You want a human shield." I reached into my blazer pocket. I bypassed the stack of eviction notices and the country club expulsion letter. Instead, my fingers closed around my smartphone. I brought it out and placed it gently next to the blank check, the dark screen reflecting the crystal chandelier hanging above us. "You see, Mother," I continued, leaning back in my chair. "I learned a very long time ago that preparation is the only defense against this family. That is why I did not arrive at 8 o'clock tonight. I arrived at 6:30. I wanted to ensure the private dining room was set up perfectly. I also happened to be sitting in the secluded velvet alcove near the coat check when you and Victoria arrived at 7:15. You were early. You thought you were completely alone in the lobby. Beatrice stiffened her eyes, darting to the phone. The desperate manic energy that had fueled her blank check stunt instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. Victoria, who was still kneeling near Marcus, slowly raised her head, her smeared mascara giving her the appearance of a cornered raccoon. I tapped the screen, unlocking the device. I opened my voice memos app and pressed play. I had turned the volume all the way up, ensuring every single syllable would bounce off the walls of the VIP room. The audio began with the muffled ambient sounds of the restaurant lobby, the soft clinking of glasses from the main bar, and the low hum of jazz music. Then Beatrice's voice sliced through the speaker, sharp, arrogant, and incredibly clear. "We need to handle this perfectly," Victoria, the recorded voice of my mother, instructed. "You know how she gets. She is always looking for a reason to play the victim." Then Victoria's voice echoed through the room, laced with privileged annoyance. "I know, Mother. I brought the folder. But what if she actually reads the documents before signing? She is a business owner now. She might actually look at the fine print." My own mother let out a cruel, dismissive laugh on the recording. It was a laugh I had heard 1,000 times throughout my childhood, a sound that used to make my blood run cold. "Get her drunk, make her pay the $15,000 bill, and then I'll slip the loan guarantor paperwork under her napkin. She's so desperate for our love she'll sign anything." The recorded Beatrice replied, her tone dripping with absolute contempt. "Just smile at her and tell her how proud we are. She will be crying tears of joy by the time the dessert arrives." I hit the pause button. The sudden silence in the private dining room was suffocating. Beatrice sat perfectly still, her face drained of all blood. She looked like a marble statue of herself, cold and completely lifeless. Victoria clamped her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. The undeniable proof of their premeditated malice hung in the air, a toxic cloud that could not be waved away with forced smiles or fake apologies. William stared at his wife, his jaw completely slack. He was a deeply flawed man, a terrible father who had enabled years of psychological abuse, but even he seemed genuinely horrified by the sheer calculated evil of his wife's plot. He looked from the phone to Beatrice, and then to Victoria, his heavy chest heaving as the reality of their scheme washed over him. "You planned this," William rasped, his voice cracking under the weight of the revelation. "You came here tonight planning to drug and frame your own sister." I did not give Beatrice or Victoria the chance to formulate another lie. I reached out and snapped my fingers again. Sarah, my ever-present assistant, stepped forward instantly from the shadows near the doorway. She walked directly over to Victoria's discarded designer handbag, which was sitting on the floor near the coat rack. Sarah reached inside and pulled out a thick blue folder, the exact folder mentioned in the recording. She walked back to the table and handed it directly to me. I dropped the blue folder right on top of the blank check. "I took the liberty of reviewing these documents while you were in the restroom earlier, Victoria," I said, maintaining my calm, clinical tone. "I must admit I was genuinely impressed by the sheer scale of your ambition. I expected you to try and stick me with the dinner bill. I even expected you to ask for a handout to cover Marcus' legal fees. But this is an entirely different level of criminality." Victoria began to shake violently, her hands trembling against her face. Marcus, who was still sitting on the rug, looked up at the blue folder, his eyes widening in horror as he recognized the logo of his own investment firm printed on the cover. He realized instantly what his wife had brought to the dinner. "Tell them what is in the folder, Victoria," I demanded. She just sobbed, shaking her head frantically side to side. "Fine, I will do the honors," I said, flipping the heavy folder open. "These are not just standard loan documents. This is a primary guarantor agreement for Apex Capital. It is an explicitly binding legal contract transferring full liability for Marcus' federal debts directly onto the signer." I looked directly into Beatrice's terrified eyes, pinning her to her chair with my gaze. "You were not just trying to manipulate me into paying for an expensive dinner, Mother. You were not just asking for a temporary bridge loan to save face. You brought me here tonight to commit premeditated identity fraud. You intended to get me heavily intoxicated play on my childhood trauma and trick me into signing a document that would make me personally liable for Marcus' multi-million-dollar federal crimes." Marcus let out a strangled gasp, realizing that his wife and mother-in-law had planned to serve me up to the Securities and Exchange Commission on a silver platter just to save his failing hedge fund and their luxurious lifestyle. You were going to let the federal government seize my entire hospitality empire. I continued, my voice rising slightly, carrying the full weight of my authority. You were going to let the FBI freeze my assets, seize my properties, and potentially charge me as a co-conspirator in a massive Ponzi scheme. You were completely willing to throw me in federal prison just to ensure Victoria did not lose her Hamptons mansion, and you did not lose your country club status. Beatrice opened her mouth trying to form words, but her throat was completely dry. She was trapped. There was no social network to save her. There was no fake heart attack that could erase the digital recording. There was no lie big enough to cover up the physical evidence sitting on the table. You thought I was desperate for your love, I said, slowly closing the blue folder. You thought I was still that pathetic, lonely little girl begging for a scrap of your affection. But you miscalculated, Beatrice. I do not want your love. I do not need your approval. You are just a room full of desperate criminals, and I am the woman who holds the keys to your entire future. William scrambled backward, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. He threw his hands up in the air, as if physically shielding himself from the toxic fallout radiating from his wife. I knew absolutely nothing about this. William stammered, his chest heaving, as he backed away from Beatrice. Chloe, you must believe me. I am a businessman. I may have made terrible investments, but I am not a felon. I never agreed to identity theft. She acted entirely on her own. He threw the woman he had been married to for 35 years directly to the wolves without a single second of hesitation. It was a stunning display of cowardice that perfectly encapsulated the Bennett family dynamic. When the ship was sinking, there was no loyalty. There were only rats scrambling for the highest piece of floating debris. Beatrice whipped her head around to glare at her husband, her eyes burning with pure venomous hatred. You spineless, pathetic coward, Beatrice spat, her voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. Do not you dare stand there and play the righteous victim. You lost our money, William. You let this idiot. She pointed a shaking finger at Marcus. Drain our accounts dry. Someone had to fix your catastrophic failures. Someone had to protect the family legacy while you sat around weeping about your bankrupt factory. She turned her furious gaze back to me, slamming both hands down onto the mahogany table. Yes, I planned it, Beatrice screamed, dropping the last remaining shred of her elegant high society facade. And I would do it again in a heartbeat. You owe us, Chloe. We clothed you, we fed you, we paid for your existence. You have millions of dollars sitting in offshore accounts doing absolutely nothing, while your own flesh and blood faces complete ruin. If I have to forge a signature to save my family from the gutter, then it is my absolute right as your mother to do so. I did not raise my voice. I simply watched her hyperventilate. You are right about one thing, Mother, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. You did plan it, but you were never going to wait for me to get drunk and sign the paperwork. You were never going to risk me actually reading the fine print under my napkin. That audio recording was just phase 1 of your little scheme. Phase 2 was far more efficient. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my tailored blazer. I walked around the massive dining table, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished wood. Victoria shrank back into Marcus' side as I passed them, but I did not even look down. I stopped directly behind Beatrice's chair. She froze completely, her shoulders rigid, her breath catching in her throat. I reached over her trembling shoulder and grabbed the heavy leather-bound dinner menu resting perfectly untouched next to her crystal wine glass. I lifted the menu, tossing it aside. Sitting directly underneath it was another stack of thick legal documents. William let out a strangled gasp. Victoria pulled herself up from the floor, clutching the edge of the table as she stared at the hidden papers. Even she looked genuinely shocked. Beatrice had kept her own favorite daughter in the dark about the final stage of the plot. I picked up the documents and flipped directly to the last page, sliding it into the center of the table under the bright overhead lights. Take a close look, William, I commanded, pointing to the bottom right corner of the page. William leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he focused on the signature line. There, in flawless flowing blue ink, was my name, Chloe Bennett. It was a perfect replica of my official corporate signature. Every loop and slant had been meticulously copied. "You pre-forged the documents," William whispered, his voice hollow with horror. He looked up at Beatrice as if staring at a complete stranger. "You already forged her signature. She spent weeks practicing it," I explained calmly, pacing back to my seat at the head of the table. "She pulled my old college applications and my tax returns from your home office files. She traced my handwriting until she perfected it. Tonight was never about manipulating me into signing a contract. Tonight was just an alibi." I looked at Beatrice, who was staring at the forged signature as if it were a ticking bomb. "You needed me to be physically present at the restaurant tonight?" I continued, ensuring every word landed with devastating precision. "You needed Henri and the waitstaff to see us having a lovely, peaceful family dinner. You needed witnesses to confirm that I was here with Marcus and Victoria. That way, when you submitted the forged guarantor forms to the bank tomorrow morning, the timeline would make perfect sense. You would tell the auditors that we had a reconciliatory dinner, and I generously agreed to bail out my brother-in-law. It was a brilliant, foolproof narrative." Beatrice suddenly lunged forward. She grabbed the forged documents with both hands, her manicured nails tearing the thick paper. She frantically crumpled the pages into a ball, trying to destroy the evidence of her federal crime. "It does not matter!" Beatrice shrieked, her eyes wild and manic, as she ripped the contract in half. "You have no proof. It is just your word against mine. I will say you signed them and then changed your mind. I will say you are trying to frame me. You have nothing." I let out a soft, genuine laugh. I sat back in my chair, watching my mother desperately shred the useless pieces of paper. "You can eat those pages if it makes you feel better, Mother," I said, a cold smile touching my lips. "They are just photocopies." Beatrice froze, her hands hovering over the shredded paper. The last trace of color vanished from her face. "I arrived at 6:30 tonight," I reminded her, checking my watch. "I intercepted the private courier you hired to deliver the original documents to Marcus' lawyer. I have the originals, Beatrice. The ones with your fingerprints all over the blue ink." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, locking eyes with the woman who had tormented me for my entire life. "I did not bring the originals to dinner," I whispered the truth, falling over the room like an executioner's blade. "I gave them to my corporate attorney 2 hours ago. And as of 8:15 tonight, he has officially submitted the forged documents, along with the lobby audio recording, directly to the local district attorney." The word attorney hung in the stagnant air of the VIP room like a physical weight. Marcus slowly pushed himself up from the floor. His expensive suit ruined his hair plastered to his sweating forehead. He was a man who had built his entire identity on the illusion of superiority. He had dined in the finest restaurants, worn the sharpest bespoke suits, and commanded rooms full of wealthy investors. Now he was nothing more than a cornered animal, realizing the trap had just snapped completely shut. He did the terrifying mental math in his head. The Securities and Exchange Commission would give him 10 years for the embezzlement and the Ponzi scheme. The local district attorney would add another 15 for the premeditated forgery and identity theft. He was going to die wearing a federal prison uniform. His chest heaved as he turned his gaze toward Victoria. He was looking for a lifeline, looking for the woman who had demanded this luxurious lifestyle to stand by his side. Victoria simply backed away, pressing her spine against the mahogany wall. She offered him absolutely no comfort. She offered him no solidarity. She just looked at him with pure, selfish disgust, entirely furious that he could no longer fund her extravagant lifestyle. The golden couple was truly dead. Marcus then turned his attention back to me. The hollow desperation in his eyes suddenly ignited into a blind, rabid fury. The polished hedge fund manager, the arrogant golden boy who had sneered at my catering business just an hour ago, completely vanished. He let out a raw, guttural roar that tore from the bottom of his chest. "You ruined my life!" Marcus screamed, spit flying from his lips as his face contorted into a mask of pure violence. "You planned this all along. You set us up, you vindictive, wretched witch. You are the reason we are losing everything." He lunged. He shoved the heavy wooden dining chair out of his way with such terrifying force that it crashed backward into the wall, splintering the expensive polished wood. He charged directly across the room toward the head of the table where I sat. His hands were curled into tight fists, his eyes wide and murderous. William did not stand up to protect his daughter. The great patriarch of the Bennett family, the man who constantly preached about family loyalty and strength, simply remained frozen in his chair, watching a desperate man charge at me. Beatrice actually took a step backward, perfectly willing to let her son-in-law physically assault me if it meant I might somehow drop the charges. They proved in a single agonizing second exactly who they were. I did not flinch. I did not even brace for impact. I knew I was absolutely safe. Before Marcus could take 3 steps toward my chair, the heavy double doors leading to the main kitchen violently burst open. They swung inward with a deafening crash, hitting the walls so hard the brass handles dented the plaster. A solid wall of white uniforms flooded into the private dining room. Chef Thomas, a massive man with forearms like tree trunks, led the charge. He was gripping a heavy cast-iron skillet in his right hand, his jaw set in a line of absolute concrete. Right behind him was Henri wielding a solid oak rolling pin. Then came Maria, the head pastry chef, clutching a heavy steel whisk. They were followed by the sous chefs, the line cooks, and even the young dishwashers. 15 members of my staff poured into the room, moving with a coordinated, fierce precision. They did not ask questions. They did not hesitate. They formed a solid, impenetrable human barricade directly between Marcus and me. Chef Thomas stepped right into Marcus' path, raising the heavy iron skillet. Marcus slammed into the chef, bouncing off Thomas' broad chest and stumbling backward onto the Persian rug. "You take one single step toward her." Thomas growled, his voice a low, terrifying rumble, "and I will personally make sure you never walk again." Henri stepped up beside Thomas, pointing the rolling pin directly at Marcus' chest. The rest of the staff closed ranks, crossing their arms and glaring at the shattered remnants of the Bennett family. Their faces were carved from stone, radiating an intense protective fury. Marcus scrambled backward across the floor, slipping on the spilled wine, as he tried to get away from the wall of angry chefs. He scrambled back until he hit the legs of the dining table, pulling his knees to his chest like a frightened child. I remained seated, watching the spectacular display of true loyalty. My biological family had spent my entire life tearing me down, treating me as a disposable asset meant to be used and discarded. They had sat perfectly still while a desperate criminal lunged at my throat. But the people standing in front of me, the people wielding skillets and rolling pins to protect me, were my actual family. When Thomas' daughter needed emergency open-heart surgery 2 years ago, I paid the hospital bills in full. When Henri was struggling with his immigration paperwork, I hired the best attorneys in Boston to secure his citizenship. When Maria lost her apartment to a fire, I put her up in a luxury suite until she found a new home. When my line cooks needed a living wage to feed their families, I doubled the industry standard and gave them full benefits. I had spent the last decade building a hospitality empire based on mutual respect and genuine care. I protected my people, and they protected me. They did not care about the Sterling Country Club. They did not care about Wall Street IPOs. They cared about the woman who treated them like human beings. "Call off your thugs!" Beatrice shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Thomas. "How dare you let your hired help threaten us? You tell them to leave this room immediately." "They are not hired help, Mother," I replied, my voice slicing cleanly through her hysteria. "They are my family. They are the people who actually step up when a violent criminal attacks me. It is a concept you have never understood because you are entirely incapable of selfless love." William finally found his voice rising shakily from his chair. "Chloe, please," he begged, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "This has gone far enough. Marcus is clearly unwell. We can handle this privately. Just tell your staff to stand down and we will leave quietly. We will simply walk out the back door and we will not bother you again." "I am afraid your departure schedule is no longer up to me, William," I said, leaning forward and resting my chin on my hands. "I told you that my attorney submitted the evidence to the district attorney." But what I did not tell you is that the district attorney has a very strict protocol regarding active flight risks in multi-million-dollar federal fraud cases. Marcus let out a loud, pathetic whimper, pressing his hands over his ears. Victoria began to hyperventilate, clutching her chest, as her perfectly orchestrated life burned to ashes around her. I gestured slowly toward the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the busy downtown street. "Look outside, William," I suggested softly. William turned his head. Beatrice and Victoria slowly turned to look as well. The dark glass of the restaurant windows suddenly exploded with blinding color. Thick, strobing bursts of red and blue light cut through the darkness, violently illuminating the horrified faces of the Bennett family. The sirens were initially distant, but they quickly amplified into a deafening, ear-splitting wail that rattled the glass panes. The flashing red and blue lights bounced off the crystal chandeliers, painting the entire VIP room in the unmistakable, frantic colors of law enforcement. The heavy oak doors of the restaurant lobby did not just swing open, they were violently thrust apart. A wave of cold night air flooded the stifling dining room, instantly followed by the heavy rhythmic thud of tactical boots marching across the imported marble floors. Chef Thomas and my protective kitchen brigade smoothly parted, stepping backward to clear a wide path. They knew their job was done. They lowered their cast-iron skillets and rolling pins, watching with grim satisfaction as the real authorities took over the scene. I remained perfectly still at the head of the table, my hands folded neatly in front of me, watching the culmination of my meticulous planning finally unfold. These were not local beat cops responding to a minor domestic disturbance. They were federal agents. Half a dozen men and women wearing dark navy windbreakers with stark yellow FBI lettering printed across their backs stormed into the private dining room. Their tactical radios crackled with harsh static, cutting through the absolute silence of the panicked Bennett family. Their faces were set in expressions of uncompromising professional stone. The lead agent, a tall, imposing woman with steel gray hair and a no-nonsense jawline, bypassed everyone else at the table and locked her eyes directly onto Marcus. Marcus, the supposed financial genius of Wall Street, the man who spent his entire life projecting an aura of untouchable wealth and extreme power, completely shattered. The arrogant smirk he had worn since the moment he walked into my restaurant evaporated. He scrambled backward, his highly polished, bespoke Italian leather shoes slipping frantically against the spilled wine on the hardwood floor. He was breathing in short, panicked gasps. In a display of ultimate pathetic cowardice, he ducked behind William. He physically grabbed his father-in-law by the shoulders, attempting to use the older man as a human shield against the advancing federal agents. William let out a high-pitched shriek of pure terror. He batted Marcus' hands away with wild, desperate strikes, entirely abandoning his familial loyalty to save his own skin. "Get off me!" William yelled, his face pale and sweating. "Do not associate me with this man. I have absolutely nothing to do with his business or his crimes." William shoved Marcus forward, violently offering his son-in-law up to the federal authorities, without a single second of hesitation. It was a beautiful display of the true Bennett family dynamic. When the severe consequences finally arrived, it was every man for himself. Two heavily built agents flanked Marcus, immediately cutting off any avenue of escape. They grabbed him firmly by the lapels of his custom-tailored suit and violently spun him around. Marcus slammed face first against the polished mahogany wall of the dining room, rattling the expensive framed artwork. His cheeks smashed hard against the wood as an agent roughly pulled his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of steel handcuffs snapping tightly shut over his wrists echoed loudly over the blaring sirens outside. Marcus grunted in pain, but the agents showed absolutely zero mercy. It was a breathtaking sight to witness. The elite hedge fund manager, who had routinely mocked my hospitality business, who had driven his own trusting investors into absolute financial ruin just to fund his mega yachts and Hampton's estates, was now reduced to a whimpering suspect pinned against a wall. He tried to speak, his voice trembling with fear. You are making a huge mistake. Marcus stammered, his cheek still pressed against the mahogany paneling. My lawyers will have your badges for this. I am a highly respected asset manager. You have the right to remain silent. The lead agent recited, her voice completely devoid of emotion, entirely ignoring his desperate threats. You are under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, securities fraud, and massive embezzlement. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Beatrice sat frozen in her expensive dining chair. The vicious matriarch of the Bennett family, who had spent her entire life orchestrating cruel social climbing schemes and looking down her nose at anyone outside her exclusive tax bracket, was entirely speechless. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She was watching the total annihilation of her carefully curated high society empire unfold right in front of her eyes. There would be no more exclusive country club invitations after tonight. There would be no more society page features highlighting their philanthropic donations. There would only be brutal mugshots, federal indictments, and public disgrace. But Victoria was not going to go quietly into the night. The horrific realization that her endless supply of stolen money was officially cut off caused her to completely snap. She let out a piercing, hysterical wail that practically drowned out the sirens flashing outside the window. She threw herself across the room, her designer heels skidding recklessly on the floor as she rushed toward the federal agents pinning her husband. She was not mourning the loss of the man she loved. She was mourning the sudden violent death of her unlimited bank accounts and her luxurious lifestyle. Marcus. Victoria shrieked, her face streaked with ruined mascara and angry tears. You cannot take him away. Do you know who we are? We are the Bennetts. You cannot just march into a private dinner and arrest my husband. He is an innocent man. You are ruining our lives. She reached out wildly, grabbing the sleeve of the lead agent's windbreaker in a frantic attempt to pull the woman away from Marcus. The federal agent did not even flinch. She slowly turned her head and leveled a glare so intensely cold and authoritative that it froze Victoria mid-scream. The agent brushed Victoria's manicured hand off her jacket with extreme professional disdain. Ma'am, the lead agent said, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet pitch that commanded absolute immediate silence in the chaotic room. I highly suggest you take a very large step back right now, or you will be joining him in the back of the transport vehicle for knowing possession of stolen assets. Victoria recoiled, but the sheer entitlement running through her veins refused to let her back down. She genuinely believed her last name was a magical shield against the laws of reality. Her face twisted into an ugly sneer. Do you know who I am? Victoria shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical frequency that made the nearby kitchen staff wince. I am Victoria Bennett. You are a public servant. My father pays your salary with his taxes. You do not touch me, and you do not touch my property. I will have your badge for this. I will have you fired and working mall security by tomorrow morning. The lead agent did not blink. She did not raise her voice. She simply signaled to the two agents standing by the door. Actually, ma'am, you are the spouse of a federal criminal and a direct beneficiary of a massive Ponzi scheme, the agent replied, stepping closer. And according to our financial warrants, every single luxury item you currently possess was purchased using embezzled funds from innocent investors, which makes your property federal evidence. The agent reached out and firmly grasped the handle of Victoria's limited edition Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag. Victoria gasped, clutching the $30,000 purse to her chest as if it were a newborn infant. Let go of it, Victoria screamed, pulling back with all her might. A brief, pathetic tug-of-war ensued right there in the middle of the VIP dining room. Victoria planted her designer heels into the carpet, gritting her teeth as she desperately tried to rip the purse away from the federal officer. It was a humiliating display of her true priorities. Her husband was currently handcuffed against a wall facing decades in federal prison, but she was willing to physically fight law enforcement over a handbag. The agent gave a sharp, professional yank, pulling the bag free from Victoria's desperate grip. Victoria stumbled forward, almost tripping over her own feet. The agent calmly turned the bag upside down over the dining table. Expensive lipsticks, A designer wallet mints, and a set of heavy car keys clattered onto the mahogany wood. The agent casually tossed the empty Birkin into a clear plastic evidence bag, sealing it tight. Beatrice could not handle the blatant disrespect. She pushed her chair back and stood up, her posture rigid, her eyes blazing with aristocratic fury. She was so deeply entrenched in her own delusion that she actually believed she could scold the FBI like a disobedient maid. "This is an absolute outrage," Beatrice bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at the lead agent. "This is illegal search and seizure. You are terrorizing my daughter over a handbag. I demand you leave this room immediately before I call the mayor and have you all arrested." The lead agent turned her piercing gaze onto Beatrice. She looked the Bennett matriarch up and down, her eyes scanning the expensive designer clothes, before stopping at the heavy glittering diamonds resting against Beatrice's collarbone. "Is that the Cartier diamond cascade necklace your son-in-law purchased for you last December?" the agent asked, her tone chillingly conversational. Beatrice instinctively raised her hands to her throat, her fingers grazing the cool, heavy diamonds. "That is none of your business," Beatrice snapped, taking a defensive step backward. "It was a holiday gift. Purchased with wire fraud money," the agent corrected, taking a step toward her. "Take it off!" Beatrice gasped, her jaw dropping open in utter shock. "I will do no such thing. You have absolutely no right." The lead agent did not argue, she simply snapped her fingers. A male agent wearing blue nitrile gloves stepped directly behind Beatrice. Before the great matriarch could protest or even move, he reached around her neck and smoothly unhooked the intricate clasp. He pulled the multi-million-dollar necklace away from her skin, letting the glittering diamonds drop heavily into another plastic evidence bag. "How dare you!" Beatrice gasped, clutching her bare chest. Her face was flushed dark red with shame. She looked frantically around the room, making eye contact with my kitchen staff. Chef Thomas Henri and Maria simply stood there, leaning on their rolling pins and skillets, watching the mighty Bennett women being systematically stripped of their stolen armor. Without the heavy diamonds, without the exclusive designer bags and the aura of untouchable wealth, Beatrice and Victoria looked incredibly small. They looked pathetic. They were no longer the queens of high society dictating who belonged and who was worthless. They were just two common thieves caught wearing stolen goods, stripped of the extravagant items that defined their entire self-worth. They were left standing in the center of the room, shivering under the harsh reality of their own actions. The lead agent zipped the evidence bags shut and handed them to a subordinate. Then she slowly turned her attention away from the sobbing women. Her cold eyes locked onto the man cowering at the very end of the table. William had spent the entire altercation trying to blend into the wallpaper. He had remained completely silent, watching his son-in-law get arrested, his daughter get stripped of her purse, and his wife lose her diamonds. He had not lifted a single finger to defend any of them, hoping the federal agents would just ignore him if he stayed quiet enough. William Bennett, the lead agent, called out, her voice echoing sharply in the quiet room. William stiffened, his face draining of whatever color it had left. "Yes," he squeaked, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the dining table. "We have a federal warrant for all of your corporate financial records," the agent stated, stepping purposefully toward him. "You are coming with us right now for questioning regarding your knowledge of the offshore bridge loans." The word questioning hung in the air, but the two federal agents stepping up behind William made it abundantly clear this was not a polite invitation. William gripped the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles turned entirely white. For decades he had ruled our family with an iron fist. He had dictated who was worthy of love, who was worthy of investment, and who was destined for failure. He had built his entire identity on the illusion of absolute patriarchal control. He was William Bennett, a man who bought politicians and commanded boardrooms. But in the face of federal authority, all that manufactured power evaporated in an instant. "I am not going anywhere with you," William barked, trying to summon his usual booming baritone. His voice cracked terribly on the last syllable. "You have absolutely no grounds to arrest me. I am a victim here. Marcus lied to me. He handled all the corporate accounts. I am completely innocent." The lead agent did not even blink at his pathetic display of cowardice. She simply nodded to the two agents flanking him. "William Bennett, You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud and aiding in the concealment of stolen assets, the agent recited smoothly. Before William could utter another protest, the agents grabbed his arms. The great patriarch of the Bennett family, the man who had terrified me throughout my entire childhood, let out a high-pitched, undignified squeal as they roughly twisted his arms behind his back. The sharp click of the handcuffs snapping around his wrists echoed through the dining room, sounding like a heavy vault door slamming shut on his entire life. He struggled against their grip, his face flushing a dangerous shade of crimson. He kicked his expensive leather shoes against the floor, panting heavily, as the reality of his complete ruin finally set in. He looked at Beatrice, who was still clutching her bare neck, but she completely averted her eyes. She offered him absolutely no support. The moment he could no longer provide her with diamonds and country club memberships, he became entirely useless to her. Then William turned his frantic gaze toward me. He saw me sitting calmly at the head of the table, surrounded by my fiercely loyal staff. He saw the woman he had spent 30 years tearing down the daughter he had deemed a worthless disappointment. Suddenly, the disdain in his eyes vanished, replaced by a desperate manic pleading. He realized in that exact moment that I was the only person in the room who held any actual power. I was the only one with clean hands and unfrozen bank accounts. Chloe, William gasped, digging his heels into the carpet as the agents began to drag him toward the door. Chloe, you have to help me. You have the best corporate legal team in Boston. Call them right now. Tell them to meet me at the Federal Building. Tell them to bring bail money. I slowly stood up from my chair. I walked around the massive dining table, my footsteps perfectly measured, until I stood just a few feet away from my father. I looked at the steel cuffs biting into his wrists. I looked at the sweat ruining his expensive tailored suit. Call your lawyers, Chloe, he begged, his voice cracking with pure panic. I am your father. You owe me this. You have to protect the family. I looked directly into his terrified eyes, feeling absolutely nothing but profound relief. The ghost of the frightened little girl who used to beg for his approval was completely gone. You stopped being my father the day you allowed your wife and daughter to forge my signature, so I would take the fall for your federal crimes, I said, my voice perfectly level and ice cold. You sat in this room and watched them try to throw me into federal prison just so you could keep your country club memberships. You do not get to invoke family loyalty when you are the one who sold me out. Chloe, please. He wept openly, now tears streaming down his flushed cheeks. I will pay you back. I will do anything. Just call your attorneys. I shook my head slowly, giving him a smile devoid of any warmth. My lawyers protect my assets, Dad. I stated, the finality of my words ringing through the silent room. You are a liability. William let out a devastated sob. His knees actually buckled, and the two federal agents had to physically haul him upward by his armpits. Take them out, the lead agent ordered. The agents dragged William and Marcus out of the VIP room. They hauled them through the massive wooden doors and marched them straight through the main restaurant lobby. My father kicked and screamed, throwing away decades of carefully cultivated dignity as he was paraded past my horrified patrons. Marcus wept loudly, begging the agents to loosen his cuffs. The heavy glass doors of the restaurant swung shut behind them, cutting off their pathetic protests. Outside, the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the street as the two men were shoved into the back of a black federal transport vehicle. The doors slammed shut. The engines roared to life. In less than a minute, the vehicles sped away into the dark Boston night, taking the patriarchs of the Bennett family directly to a federal holding cell. I turned slowly back to face the dining room. Chef Thomas and the kitchen staff silently lowered their weapons. They exchanged grim nods of satisfaction before respectfully filing out of the room, closing the heavy wooden doors behind them. The VIP dining room was suddenly engulfed in a suffocating, deafening silence. Beatrice and Victoria were left completely alone on the far side of the table. The transformation was absolute. The two women who had walked into my restaurant reeking of arrogance and stolen wealth were now completely broken. Victoria was slumped in her chair, her face streaked with black makeup, staring blankly at the empty plastic evidence bag that used to hold her $30,000 purse. Beatrice stood, trembling, her hands covering her face, her neck bare and devoid of its diamond armor. They had absolutely nothing left. Their bank accounts were frozen. Their mansions would be seized by the federal government at sunrise. Their husbands were facing decades in maximum security prison. Their elite social circle would shun them by breakfast. The empire of lies and stolen money had collapsed, leaving them entirely exposed to the brutal reality of their own actions. They were stripped of their glamour, their power, and their cruelty. They looked incredibly small and utterly pathetic. I remained standing at the head of the table, watching them quietly hyperventilate in the wreckage of their own making. I did not feel the need to gloat. The silence was punishing enough. The heavy wooden doors cracked open just a few inches. Henri, my impeccably dressed restaurant manager, stepped quietly into the room. He carried a polished silver tray, balancing a single slip of thick white paper. He walked gracefully past Beatrice and Victoria, refusing to even make eye contact with them. He stopped directly in front of their side of the table. Henri placed the polished silver tray down on the mahogany surface with a soft metallic clink that echoed loudly in the cavernous silent room. Resting perfectly centered on the silver platter was the crisp, white itemized receipt for the evening's extravagant birthday celebration. It detailed every single gluttonous choice they had made just 2 hours prior, when they still believed they were the untouchable royalty of Boston. There were the 4 bottles of imported vintage champagne. There was the beluga caviar service. There were the custom Wagyu steaks and the gold leaf dessert platters Victoria had demanded to celebrate her husband's supposed financial genius. At the very bottom, printed in bold black ink, was the final total of $15,000. Henri stood perfectly straight, his hands clasped neatly behind his back, his face a mask of polite professional detachment. He did not look at the empty space where Beatrice's diamond necklace used to be. He did not glance at the spilled wine or the scuff marks the federal agent's tactical boots had left on the floor. He simply looked at the 2 ruined women and delivered his standard closing line. "I hope you enjoyed your dining experience this evening, ladies," Henri said smoothly. "Whenever you are ready to settle the bill, I can process your payment." Beatrice stared down at the white slip of paper as if it were a venomous snake coiled on the silver tray. Her hands began to shake violently. Pure instinct took over as she reached down to grab her designer handbag to pull out her limitless platinum credit card. But her hand grasped empty air. She had dropped her clutch when the FBI agent stormed the room and one of the investigators had meticulously catalogued. It scooped it up and carried it out the door. She had absolutely nothing. Her husband was currently sitting in the back of a federal transport vehicle. The offshore accounts Marcus had set up for them were undoubtedly locked frozen solid by government warrants. Next to her, Victoria was experiencing the exact same terrifying realization. She frantically patted the pockets of her tailored designer dress, her breath catching in her throat. She looked wildly around the room, searching for the $30,000 Birkin bag the female agent had confiscated. It was gone. The exclusive titanium black card she used to fund her entire existence had been sitting right inside that purse. The cash she carried to tip valets was gone. Her car keys were gone. Her entire identity had been zipped up in a clear plastic evidence bag and driven away. The psychological weight of their new reality crashed down on them with suffocating force. 30 minutes ago, they were multimillionaires sneering at the working class and mocking my catering business. Now they were 2 penniless women sitting in a shattered VIP room with no husbands, no homes, no social standing, and absolutely zero access to their stolen wealth. They were completely destitute. Henri cleared his throat softly, refusing to break his professional stance. "Will we be splitting the check this evening, or will one of you be taking care of the entire balance?" Beatrice looked up from the silver tray. The arrogant, vicious matriarch who had spent her entire life orchestrating cruel social climbing schemes and looking down her nose at anyone outside her exclusive tax bracket was entirely gone. Her face was pale and drawn, her eyes wide with a level of pathetic, genuine desperation I had never seen from her before. She was forced to swallow decades of immense toxic pride. She slowly turned her head and looked across the long mahogany table directly at me. "Chloe, please!" Beatrice begged, her voice trembling, a fragile whisper that cracked under the weight of her utter humiliation. "Please, just pay the bill. We have nothing. They took everything. We do not even have taxi money to get to a hotel tonight. You know we cannot pay this." She reached her shaking hands out across the table, trying to invoke a sense of family loyalty that she had personally destroyed years ago. "You are my daughter." Beatrice wept, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes and ruining her expensive makeup. "You cannot just leave us here like this. We have nowhere to go. Please, Chloe, be the bigger person. Pay the restaurant and help us get a cab. We are begging you." I looked at her outstretched hands. I looked at the tears streaming down her face. For 30 years, this woman had made it her personal mission to ensure I felt small, insignificant, and entirely unworthy of love. She had allowed my sister to steal my college fund. She had participated in a scheme to frame me for federal fraud. She had watched with a satisfied smirk as my life burned down around me. Now she wanted grace. Now she wanted charity. I placed my hands flat on the table and slowly stood up from my chair. I took my time smoothing out the invisible wrinkles in my designer dress, projecting an aura of absolute untouchable calm. I looked down the length of the table at the two women who had tormented me for my entire existence. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I felt the pure, clean air of total liberation. "I do not do charity for fraudsters," I stated, my voice echoing coldly off the crystal chandeliers overhead. "You sat down at my table. You ordered the most expensive items on the menu to celebrate money you stole from innocent people. You consumed every last bite of it while mocking my livelihood. You ordered it. You pay for it." Victoria let out a loud, agonizing sob. The final shred of her delusional reality completely dissolved. She was a woman who had never worked a day in her life, who had built her entire persona on the money her criminal husband provided. Now that husband was in jail, facing decades behind bars. Her luxury items were sitting in a federal evidence locker. She did not have a single friend in the world who would take her calls after tonight. The golden child of the Bennett family had literal sense to her name. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing so hard her shoulders shook violently. Her perfect, curated world had burned to ashes, leaving her with absolutely nothing but the harsh consequences of her own horrific actions. She slowly lifted her head, her face a tragic mask of total, absolute defeat. Her voice was barely a whisper when she finally spoke, looking between Henri and the massive, unpayable bill resting on the silver tray. "How are we supposed to pay?" I did not answer Victoria immediately. I let her pathetic question hang in the stagnant air of the VIP dining room. For their entire lives, they had never once considered the actual cost of anything. They simply took, consumed, and demanded, more, believing the world existed solely to cater to their extravagant whims. Now the bill had finally come due and the account was entirely empty. I gave Henri a single subtle nod. He understood exactly what was required. He turned on his heel and walked briskly out of the room. Beatrice and Victoria watched him leave, their eyes wide with a foolish, fleeting spark of hope. Perhaps they thought he was going to void the check. Perhaps they believed their former social standing still carried enough weight to simply walk out the door without consequences. They stood in the wreckage of their lives, waiting for a magical reprieve that was never going to arrive. Henri returned exactly 60 seconds later. He was not carrying a comped receipt. He was carrying a bundle of thick industrial-grade rubber. He stepped up to the table and dropped the heavy bundle directly onto the polished mahogany right next to the silver platter holding their massive bill. The items landed with a dull, visceral thud that made Victoria physically jump. It was 2 industrial dishwashing aprons. They were thick, stiff, and covered in faded bleach spots from years of heavy commercial kitchen use. Sitting on top of the aprons were 2 pairs of heavy-duty, elbow-length, bright yellow rubber gloves. Beatrice stared at the rubber items as if Henri had just placed a dead rat on her dinner plate. She physically recoiled, pressing her spine against the back of her chair. "What is the meaning of this?" Beatrice demanded, her voice shaking with a mixture of terror and lingering aristocratic outrage. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. The math is incredibly simple, Beatrice, I explained, speaking slowly and clearly to ensure she absorbed every single word. You just consumed $15,000 worth of imported food and vintage champagne. You currently possess absolutely zero liquid assets. Your bank accounts are frozen by federal mandate. Your physical assets are sitting in FBI evidence lockers. You do not have a single dime to your name. However, you both have two working hands. I gestured toward the heavy rubber gear resting on the table. The minimum wage in this city is $15 an hour. You have a $15,000 debt to work off. That equals exactly 1,000 hours of manual labor. Split between the two of you, that is 500 hours each. The dish pit is right through those double doors. The blood completely drained from Victoria's face. She looked at the ugly yellow gloves and let out a horrified gasp. You want us to wash dishes? Victoria squeaked, staring at me as if I had entirely lost my mind. I am wearing a custom silk dress. I have never washed a dish in my entire life. Then tonight will be an excellent educational experience for you, I replied, my tone completely devoid of sympathy. Beatrice slammed her hand down on the table, trying to summon the terrifying matriarchal presence that had commanded respect for decades. I absolutely will not do this, Beatrice snarled, her face flushing a deep, angry red. I am Beatrice Bennett. I sit on the board of the Boston Symphony. I chair the annual hospital gala. I will not be humiliated by a caterer. I will call my wealth manager in the morning and wire you the funds. Until then, we are leaving. She pushed her chair back and stood up, grabbing Victoria by the arm. Come, Victoria. We are walking out of this ridiculous establishment right now. Henri did not physically block their path. He simply reached into the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out his cell phone. He tapped the screen, unlocking it with a calm, deliberate motion. I highly advise against walking toward that door, Henri said, his voice perfectly polite but laced with absolute concrete authority. Defrauding an innkeeper and theft of services are serious crimes in this jurisdiction. Given the total amount of this particular bill, $15,000 constitutes a felony grand larceny charge. Beatrice froze in her tracks, her hand still gripping Victoria's arm. You would not dare call the police on us, Beatrice whispered, her eyes wide with panic. The FBI just dragged your husband out in handcuffs for federal wire fraud, I reminded her, leaning back in my chair. Do you genuinely believe the local police are going to give you the benefit of the doubt on a $15,000 dine and dash? Henri already has the precinct on speed dial. If you take one step out of this VIP room without settling your debt, he will press call. You will spend the night in a municipal holding cell wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of your designer silk. Victoria let out a sharp, terrified whimper. She had just watched her husband get slammed against a wall and cuffed by federal agents. The horrific reality of a concrete jail cell suddenly eclipsed her desperate need to maintain her high society dignity. She ripped her arm away from her mother's tight grip. Mom, we cannot go to jail. Victoria sobbed, her chest heaving, as blind panic completely overtook her. I cannot go to jail. They took Marcus. They took the house. We have nothing left. We cannot fight this. Beatrice stood entirely paralyzed. She looked at the heavy oak doors leading to the lobby and freedom. She looked at Henry's thumb, hovering perfectly still over the call button on his phone. Then she looked down at the ugly, stained rubber aprons resting on the mahogany table. The grand illusion of the Bennett family empire officially flatlined. There were no powerful lawyers coming to save them. There were no offshore accounts left to bail them out. There was only the brutal, immediate reality of their own actions. With trembling hands, Beatrice slowly reached out. She picked up the thick rubber apron. She held it away from her body, staring at it with absolute total defeat. She slipped the heavy strap over her perfectly coiffed hair, letting the stained rubber fall over her expensive designer dress. She picked up the bright yellow gloves and slowly pulled them over her manicured hands. Victoria, crying silently beside her, followed suit, mirroring her mother's ultimate degradation. Henri led the way through the swinging double doors, Beatrice and Victoria followed, dragging their feet across the pristine tile. The transition from the hushed elegance of the VIP room to the blinding fluorescent reality of the commercial kitchen was brutal. The dish pit sat in the far end. It was an industrial cavern of stainless steel, thick steam, and punishing heat. Stacks of soiled plates, encrusted with the remnants of their decadent meal, sat waiting beside a massive deep basin filled with scalding, soapy water. "Get to work," Henri instructed, pointing to the submerged scrubbing brushes. "Every broken dish adds $50 to your balance." Beatrice closed her eyes and stepped up to the basin. Victoria stood trembling beside her. Together they plunged their bright yellow gloves into the murky, scalding water. There was no screaming. There was no dramatic hair-pulling or screaming fits. The fight had been entirely drained out of them. They began scrubbing the grease off the gold-rimmed plates in total, humiliated silence. I walked over to the kitchen doors and stood just inside the threshold watching them. The kitchen staff recognized my posture and immediately fell back, giving me absolute silence and space. The only sounds remaining were the mechanical hum of the industrial dishwasher and the clink of porcelain against steel. I stepped closer until I stood directly behind them. "For 34 years, you made it abundantly clear that I was the disposable. Bennett," I said, my voice dropping to a calm, chillingly quiet register that cut through the kitchen noise. "You spent 3 decades ensuring I knew my place. You told me I lacked the refinement, the intelligence, and the ruthlessness required to succeed in your world. You allowed William and Marcus to steal from me. You forged my signature to protect your offshore accounts. You laughed while plotting to send me to a federal penitentiary, just so you could keep buying designer handbags and eating caviar." Beatrice scrubbed a plate, frantically staring straight down into the greasy suds. Victoria let out a choked, muffled sob but kept her hands submerged in the water. "You believed your wealth insulated you from consequences?" I continued, moving to stand right beside Beatrice. "You thought you could walk into my establishment, insult my life's work, and force me to finance your escape from the federal government. But the universe demands balance, Beatrice. Karma is absolute." I leaned in closer, staring at the side of her perfectly manicured face. "Tonight, the men who funded your arrogance are sitting in a concrete holding cell facing decades in prison. And the 2 high society matriarchs who orchestrated my lifelong torment are scrubbing dirty plates in my kitchen for $15 an hour just to stay out of a jail cell themselves. You are not royalty anymore. You are a liability. You are washing away the remnants of your own gluttony, while the world you worshipped completely forgets you exist." Beatrice finally broke. Her shoulders slumped, and a low, guttural wail escaped her throat. She dropped a soapy sponge back into the water and leaned her forehead against the cold, stainless steel edge of the sink, weeping uncontrollably. Victoria leaned against her mother, her tears splashing directly into the dirty dishwater. They were entirely broken, stripped of their armor, and left with nothing but the devastating reality of their own karma. I did not offer them a tissue. I did not offer them a single word of comfort. I simply watched them cry into the suds for 10 seconds, internalizing the absolute finality of my victory. I turned my back on them and pushed through the swinging double doors, leaving the heat of the kitchen behind. The cool, conditioned air of the main dining room washed over me. Soft classical music played from the concealed speakers. I walked slowly through the center aisle of the restaurant, my head held high. My staff caught my eye as I passed. Chef Thomas gave a firm, respectful nod from the expo line. Henri bowed his head slightly from the host stand. The elite patrons seated at the velvet booths, the city's true power brokers who had witnessed the FBI raid, stopped their quiet conversations to look at me. They offered subtle, deferential nods, acknowledging the new, indisputable reality. The Bennett empire was dead. I was the only one left standing. I walked past the valet stand and pushed through the heavy glass front doors of my restaurant. The crisp night air of the Boston waterfront hit my face immediately. It felt incredibly clean. It carried the faint scent of salt water and impending winter, a sharp, bracing chill that completely washed away the lingering toxic residue of my family. I stood on the pristine cobblestone sidewalk, taking a deep, slow breath. My lungs expanded fully for what felt like the first time in 34 years. The suffocating weight of the Bennett family expectations, the constant belittling, the endless psychological warfare, it was all entirely gone. A sleek black chauffeur-driven Maybach glided silently down the street, its headlights cutting through the evening shadows. It pulled smoothly to a stop directly in front of me, perfectly aligned with the curb. The driver, an impeccably dressed man who had worked for me since I opened my first bakery, stepped out quickly and opened the heavy rear door. He offered a polite, respectful nod, completely undisturbed by the flashing blue and red police lights still reflecting off the buildings down the block. "Good evening, Miss Bennett," he said, his voice a low, reassuring rumble. "Good evening, David," I replied. Before I stepped into the luxurious interior of the vehicle, I turned my head and looked back at the sprawling brick facade of my restaurant. The front dining room windows glowed with warm, inviting amber light, framing the elite patrons continuing their expensive meals. But my eyes bypassed the glamour. I looked further down the alleyway toward the rear of the building. There was a long, rectangular window of frosted glass that looked directly into the commercial dish pit. The harsh, blinding white fluorescent light of the kitchen spilled out onto the dark pavement. Through that glowing frosted pane, I could clearly see two dark silhouettes moving erratically. They were unmistakable. I watched the hunched, defeated posture of my mother Beatrice and the frantic, jerky movements of my sister Victoria. They stood side by side in front of the massive industrial sinks. Even through the distorted glass, I could see the heavy rubber aprons weighing them down. I watched as they grabbed plate after plate, plunging them into the scalding water, scrubbing frantically to chip away at their massive $15,000 debt. I stood on the sidewalk, letting the beautiful, poetic justice of the scene wash over me. These were women who had never touched a dirty sponge in their lives. They had built their entire existence on the backs of underpaid laborers, demanding absolute perfection while contributing absolutely nothing to the world. They had mocked my ambition. They had called my career a pathetic working-class hobby. They had laughed when my father tried to frame me for his federal crimes. Now they were trapped in my kitchen, effectively indentured servants to the very establishment they had spent the evening insulting. 500 hours of manual labor awaited each of them. 500 hours of grease sweat and boiling water. It was not a violent revenge. It was not a screaming match or a dramatic physical altercation. It was the purest, most devastating form of corporate execution. I had simply held up a mirror to their own gluttony and handed them the bill. I slid into the spacious back seat of the Maybach, and David quietly shut the heavy door behind me. The thick acoustic glass completely sealed out the noise of the city, plunging the cabin into a serene, luxurious silence. The rich smell of custom leather surrounded me. I reached forward and opened the hidden mahogany compartment of the car's built-in minibar. The interior was softly illuminated, revealing a chilled bottle of vintage Dom Perignon and a pair of crystal flutes. I pulled the heavy green bottle from its icy sleeve. I peeled back the gold foil, untwisted the wire cage, and popped the cork with a soft, satisfying sigh. I poured the pale golden liquid into the crystal flute, watching the tiny bubbles race to the surface. I raised the glass toward the window, pointing it directly at the distant fluorescent glow of the dish pit. I took a long, slow sip. The champagne was ice cold and tasted like absolute, total victory. I leaned back against the plush leather headrest as the Maybach smoothly accelerated, pulling away from the curb and gliding seamlessly into the steady flow of city traffic. The streetlights of Boston swept over the tinted windows, casting rhythmic, moving shadows across the interior of the car. I reached into the pocket of my coat and pulled out my cell phone. The screen was lit up with dozens of automated alerts. News notifications were already rolling in. High-profile arrests in the financial district. The FBI raid at my restaurant was making immediate headlines. The Bennett empire was officially crumbling in the public eye. I opened my contact list. I found the contact labeled Beatrice. My thumb hovered over the screen for a fraction of a second. There would be no final text message. There would be no dramatic parting words or explanations. They did not deserve an explanation. I pressed the screen selecting block contact, permanently severing her from my life. I scrolled down to Victoria. I pressed block contact. I scrolled down to William. I pressed block contact. I erased them with the exact same cold efficiency they had used when they tried to destroy me. With 3 simple taps on a glass screen, the Bennett family was entirely deleted from my existence. They could no longer reach me. They could no longer manipulate me. They could no longer demand my money, my time, or my sanity. The emotional tether that had held me hostage for decades was completely permanently severed. I locked the phone and tossed it onto the empty leather seat beside me. I took another sip of champagne, letting the profound silence of the vehicle settle around me. I looked out the window as the Maybach carried me toward my penthouse overlooking the harbor. The city felt entirely different now. It was no longer a chessboard controlled by my father. It was no longer a social hierarchy dominated by my mother. It was a landscape of my own making. I had built a multi-million-dollar culinary empire from scratch with my own 2 hands. I had cultivated a staff that respected me and a life that belonged solely to me. My revenge was complete. It was elegant, strictly business, and utterly devastating. I had not just survived the toxicity of the Bennett family. I had outsmarted them, outworked them, and completely conquered them. They were exactly where they belonged, scrubbing my dirty dishes, while I rode away into the night, the undisputed architect of my own flawless victory. True power and self-worth come from financial and emotional independence, not from seeking validation from toxic family members. Chloe's ultimate victory was not just forcing her abusers to face the consequences of their gluttony. It was severing the emotional tether that held her hostage. By walking away and permanently blocking their access to her life, she demonstrated that healing often requires setting absolute, uncompromising boundaries. Success may be the best revenge, but preserving your inner peace is the ultimate reward. Have you ever had to completely cut ties with toxic relatives to protect your peace? Share your story and comment below.